Greetings, randos. There is no real preamble necessary with this, other than check out part 1 if you haven't already. For now, though, let's get stuck back into The Hobbit, because as we know, these movies are, of course, totally about a hobbit. Occasionally. Anyway, we open in the village of Bree, and it is raining, because of course it was raining in Bree in Fellowship of the Ring. Peter Jackson eats a carrot, and the camera follows a rather short individual as he is approached by two threatening-looking men. The short man is revealed to be Thorin, and he enters the one pub in Bree, the Prancing Pony. Thorin is handed a drink and a plate of bread, olives, and cheese. Thorin doesn't seem to take any issue with the food he has been presented with, which is contrasted with what we saw in Rivendell in the previous movie.
Where's the meat?
Which heavily implied that dwarves typically eat lots of meat. I actually like that Thorin's reaction to foreign food is not the same as the other dwarves. This suggests that he has potentially traveled more extensively and he is therefore more used to eating strange food. Anyway, Thorin notices that he is being watched by two rather unsavory looking individuals, both of whom approach him, prompting him to reach for his blade. And Thorin is then joined at the table by a certain wizard, causing the two men to back down. Gandalf introduces himself to Thorin, revealing that this is the first time these two have met. Thorin says he knows who Gandalf is, and Gandalf asks why Thorin is here in Bree.
I received word that my father had been seen wandering the wilds near Dunland.
So this gives a little bit of information as to what exactly is going on with Thrain. All we know from the previous movie is that he went missing at some point. As for whether or not this plot thread is necessary, by the end of the film we will discover that it absolutely was not, but for now it is serving as an explanation as to why Thorin is in Bree. Thorin suggests that Gandalf thinks Thrain is dead, and Gandalf's response is that he was not at the Battle of Moria. This is a strange counter, as it would be entirely possible to believe Thrain to be dead without having literally seen him fall in battle, but the reason for this rather strange line of dialogue is to allow Thorin to give us a flashback.
But I was.
In this flashback, we do actually get some new information. Thrain prevents Thorin from fighting Azog, saying,
Azog means to kill us all. One by one, he will destroy the line of Durin.
So this is something I missed in the last movie. We hear that Azog swore to wipe out the line of Durin. How does anyone know this? The only way anyone could know this is if Azog told them, and although Azog is a bit of a simpleton, I somewhat doubt that he would do this. Plus, he appears to only speak the Black Speech. Anyway, Thorin wants to fight alongside his father, but his father swears Azog will not take Thorin.
My father led a charge towards the Elven-Gate. He never returned.
Alright, so this unfortunately complicates Thorin's motivation somewhat. This can absolutely work. Complex characters are of course not a bad thing, but as the ending of the previous movie did a pretty good job of fumbling Thorin, I do not have high hopes that adding yet another motivation to him will help. So, with this additional information, this means that Azog killed Thror, then Thrain charged in and was never seen again, and then Thorin chopped off Azog's arm. Unfortunately, as this is no longer story time with Uncle Balin, we cannot use the unreliable narrator defense. This flashback confirmed that Thorin did in fact take a metric ton of ass-whooping from Azog's mace, and was able to defend himself using a plank of wood, resulting in absolutely no long-term injuries, and, more importantly, it means that after de-handing Azog, Thorin did in fact choose not to finish him off, thanks to the camera cutting away. Anyway, after the battle, Thorin was told that his father had fallen, although he claims to have searched every body and was unable to locate him. So Thorin declares vehemently that his father is still alive in spite of there being no supporting evidence in decades.
Thorin, it's been a long time since anything but rumor was heard of Thran.
He still lives, I am sure of it.
Setting aside for a moment the fact that there has been evidence, as this is why Thorin claims to be in Bree, I have no issue with this part whatsoever. Thorin is clinging to hope, and he is unwilling to even entertain the idea that his father has died. Gandalf then asks what happened to Thror's ring, as it was one of the rings of power. Thorin reveals that Thror gave the ring to Thrain before the battle, suggesting that if Thrain is still alive, then he is currently in possession of the ring.
I know my father came to see you before the Battle of Moria. What did you say to him?
I urged him to march upon Erebor.
Okay, so this fits with some of what we know about Gandalf's motivation, although there are still pieces of it that are a mystery. Gandalf wanted Thrain to return to Erebor with an army, rather than battle the orcs in Moria.
And I would say the same to you. Take back your homeland.
Thorin realizes that Gandalf is not sitting across the table from him purely by chance, and Gandalf states that the dragon has sat in Erebor long enough and that he fears darker minds will turn their attention towards it. Still a big hole in Gandalf's reasoning here, as remember he supposedly did not know anything about Sauron's potential return until after he bumped into Radagast. So now things get Rings of Power-y.
The account of a human spy retrieved from an enemy dungeon. He drew this to record the tower's location.
Gandalf tells Thorin that whilst on the road, he was attacked by bandits who assumed him to be a hobo. One of the bandits was carrying a piece of fabric with a message written in black speech, and Gandalf's discovery of this is what prompted him to locate Thorin, hence their meeting here.
What?
Let me back up for a second. There are a group of bandits. These bandits presumably include the men who followed Thorin earlier, and the two men who approached him before Gandalf scared them off. These bandits have been offered payment to kill Thorin, from whom we have absolutely no idea yet, except, wait, there is actually a character that comes to mind. Anyway, for no reason whatsoever, some of these bandits attacked Gandalf on the road, and this led to him obtaining their evil contract written in black speech. Alright, to summarize this rather defective piece of writing, Gandalf is using the fact that there is a price on Thorin's head to try to convince him to meet with the 7 Dwarf Lords and take back Erebor now. Thorin can wait no longer. The reason why Gandalf has this information is because some bandits randomly attacked him. Meaning that, if we draw this to its ultimate conclusion, the reason why the dwarves are convinced to set out on their quest and the reason why the events of The Hobbit take place at all is all thanks to some less than competent bandits picking a fight with Gandalf. There is, however, one way out of this that does not rely on blind luck, which is that potentially Gandalf somehow knew or suspected that these bandits were hunting Thorin, after having been hired by the character whose single character trait is that he wants the head of Dwarfman, and so Gandalf attacked these bandits in order to acquire proof of their intent so as to convince Thorin to take immediate action. This, I think, is an interesting idea. This gives some moral ambiguity to Gandalf's character, suggesting that he is, for lack of a better word, morally grey. Unfortunately, this is all in my head. This is not in the film. There is no supporting evidence for this hypothesis, so we have to conclude that, yeah, it was just some random bandits looking to mug a hobo. So anyway, Thorin rejects this idea, saying that the 7 Dwarf Lords swore their oaths to the one who bears the Arkenstone, and as the Arkenstone is currently underneath Smaug, they are not obligated to help him. So, nonsense aside, this scene does actually have a purpose, and so it is not a waste of time. We learn a bit more about Gandalf and Thorin, and it helps to renew a sense of purpose for this particular movie. The stakes are being expanded, and the consequences for success or failure are being firmly established. This is no longer a vague suggestion that they go to Erebor, do something with the dragon, and then GG, lads. To retake Erebor, they need an army. To get an army, they need the Arkenstone. To get the Arkenstone, they need a burglar to steal it from Smaug. This is nice and clear, provided we don't ask too many questions, such as why exactly the dwarves prioritize who has the Arkenstone over the Prince of Erebor asking for aid in a time of need, or how exactly anyone could possibly hope to locate the Arkenstone in amongst the literal sea of gold underneath Erebor. Alrighty, so Thorin wants to find his father, believes his father to be alive, is not a defeatist, is well traveled, and travels alone. And Gandalf is lucky, is willing to use people for the greater good, and is willing to help Thorin, although only because he wants to dispose of Smaug. And then we jump forwards 12 months to the current timeline where Bilbo and the dwarves are mid-quest. Bilbo is hiding behind some rocks and is watching Azog and his pack of cartoon dinosaurs who are still tracking them, and are evidently extremely close to finding them. Again. Which means that after the end of the first film, the eagles carried the party presumably some significant distance, and yet Azog was still able to track them, even though eagles can fly, and therefore do not leave behind any means by which to be tracked. Apart from, I guess, bird shit? This leads me nicely into another big question that I have. What exactly does Azog know? As depicted, he seems to know nothing about the quest or its objective, yet was somehow able to locate Thorin in the first movie, and has somehow managed to keep up. I ask because if Azog does know about their quest, then this of course means that he knows exactly where Thorin is going, and could theoretically set a trap. At this point, however, we cannot confirm either way. We also see a glimpse of a giant bear, more on that later. Anyway, alongside the nonsense, we get a nice slab of character information. Bilbo returns to the dwarves and tells them how close Azog is. The film implies that Gandalf had suggested Bilbo be the one to check on the orcs, meaning Bilbo and Gandalf are aware of how he can best be of use to the dwarves, and that Thorin now trusts and values Bilbo, considering him to be a fully fledged member of the group. Anyway, Bilbo tells them that the wargs have not yet picked up their scent, which calls into question how on earth they have managed to follow them at all, but says that they are no more than a couple of leagues away, which equates to about 11 kilometers. After having to assert himself and make the dwarves listen to him, he tells them that there is something else out there. The bear. So the dwarves are now, apparently, torn between going forwards and being caught by a giant bear, or going backwards and being caught by Azog. Azog has absolutely no justifiable reason for being here, which suggests that the reason why he is here is to force the protagonists to deal with the bear. Anyway, Gandalf tells them that there is a house nearby, and Thorin asks whose house it is.
Whose house?
Thy friend or foe? Now then, he will help us, or he will kill us.
And then, because the script has of course decided that they have no choice but to seek refuge in this mysterious house by placing the primary antagonist relatively close by with no in-universe justification, they decide to head towards the house. The editing implies that Azog is now extremely close, although this turns out to be manufactured tension, because he is not seen again until the following scene. The dwarves approach the house, and the giant bear bursts out of the forest. Then the tension is amped up again, as they can't open the door. Oh dear, whatever will they do now? The problem is that this is also cheating. The reason they couldn't open the door is because none of them other than Thorin thought that maybe they should undo the latch on the door. Meaning that all of the dwarves are reduced to bumbling morons in order to dial up the tension. I mean, I guess this is an improvement over having all of the dwarves, Thorin included, be morons in the name of comedy. I have no idea. I guess I'll take what I can. One alternative way to achieve the exact same thing would be to have the latch on the door be out of reach of the dwarves, as they are short, and as we see later, the owner of this house is really, really tall. So anyway, the bear nearly breaks into the house, but the dwarves hold it back and are able to lock the door. During this, Bilbo instinctively draws his sword and prepares to defend himself. This I quite like, as it shows that he has become far more comfortable with the idea of violence. This is a totally natural evolution of his character from the troll scene to the goblin fight to the golem scene to now, provided of course that we discard the climax of the last movie where he turned into a superhero. Anyway, the dwarves overpowering the bear and closing the door seems like a stretch, but this kind of thing could swing either way, especially once we learn what exactly this bear is, so I'm not going to spend any time on it. Gandalf reveals that the house they are in belongs to the bear, whose name is Beorn. So this means that upon finding themselves in the forest after being transported by the eagles, still somehow being relatively close to a pack of wargs, and also being relatively close to a giant man-bear, Gandalf's solution was to flee to the giant man-bear's house and lock the door. This seems incredibly reckless, particularly given that he already knew of Beorn and thus could have avoided him. Anyway, during this, we see that Oin is still using his broken ear trumpet after it was squashed by the goblins. I actually like this. This is certainly preferable to him inexplicably having a new one, or the script forgetting that this character is deaf. We also see Dori once again being very protective of Ori. This is something that seems to happen frequently, and I do find it quite interesting, so it's something that I'll have a poke around with when I do my final autopsy. Anyway, the house is partly a barn, indicating that Beorn literally lives with his animals, and it seems to be well stocked with food, and we later see that, curiously, he has a chess set, despite him having no obvious person with whom to play chess. And so, Gandalf tells them all to settle in for the night. Okay, so Bilbo is assertive, is confident, likes to be useful and help, and has become more comfortable with defending himself. Gandalf has confidence in Bilbo, has a vast amount of knowledge of Middle-earth, and can be reckless. Thorin trusts Gandalf. Azog is capable of tracking the dwarves when they are many leagues away, and is also incapable of tracking the dwarves when they are no more than 2 leagues away. Beorn is unpredictable, can be reasoned with, does not like dwarves, feels at home living with animals, and is a practical thinker as he stockpiles food. Dori is very protective of Ori and is afraid of and dislikes unnatural magic. We then cut to later that night. Beorn is skulking around outside, and we see that Azog is watching. This means that, yes, Azog did manage to track the dwarves from where he last saw them all the way to Beorn's house. How he did this?
I have no fucking idea.
So, an orc tells Azog to attack them now and kill them in their sleep. Azog declines, stating that the beast stands guard. This tells us that Beorn is an extremely threatening creature, as even Azog would prefer not to get in Beorn's way. See, Rings of Power writers, do you see how goddamn easy it is to build characters off each other? We know almost nothing about Beorn, and Azog is as one-dimensional as they come. And yet, the writers of The Hobbit have just informed us of Beorn's character using Azog. This isn't hard. Anyway, Azog says they will wait for the dwarves to leave, and they will kill them on the road. This scene also confirms that Azog knows exactly where the dwarves are, and given his insane tracking skills, this should also mean that the dwarves cannot escape. But because of some incredible levels of unfounded cosmic convenience, we are then introduced to Bolg, who tells Azog that he has been summoned by the Master in Dol-Goldur. I will wait until another time to talk about Bolg. What has just happened, though, is that Bolg has traveled from Dol-Goldur to Beorn's house, has located Azog somehow, and told him to return to Dol-Goldur. Holy motherfucking plot convenience. Well, just like that, I guess the dwarves escape once again. And given that the outcome here is that Azog is forced to stop chasing Thorin and return to Dol-Goldur, this means that including him during this opening portion of the film was in fact simply a cheap and unjustified way to unnecessarily and artificially amp up the drama and tension. What would have been far more believable would be if Azog willingly returned to Dol-Goldur after losing Thorin at the end of the first movie. Maybe the writers didn't want to depict Azog as being someone who ever gives up, but this would have been preferable in my eyes as it would have been driven entirely by the character's own decisions. Okay, Beorn is extremely threatening and dangerous. Azog is pragmatic, has a master, and is reluctantly obedient. Cut to Azog in Dol-Goldur, meaning that he has traveled here from Beorn's house, which is about the same distance as it is from the Shire to Rivendell. Dare I say a week has passed? Let's go with 4 days. I'm sure the giant white anime wolf can run pretty fast. Anyway, we see that orcs are gathering in the ruined fortress. Azog communicates with Definitely Not Sauron, who tells him that their numbers are growing, and Azog is then ordered to lead the armies. Upon being torn from his one defining character trait and motivation, Azog asks what will happen to Thorin, as he had evidently been promised Thorin's head. Definitely Not Sauron then disappears after saying that death will come to all. Azog then summons Bolg.
Waldrek, I have a task for you.
Yeah, man, go stick the evil sword in the dam and bring me a Mordor worthy of Mordor. God, that scene was so goddamn stupid. So anyway, the outcome of this scene is that Azog will no longer pursue Thorin, leaving that job to Bolg. Instead, he will lead Definitely Not Sauron's army. This scene is very mechanical and pretty unnecessary, but we do actually get a bit of character information from it. We learn that Azog is obedient. He is unwilling to defy his master. He will take an action that he does not want to take, either because he is loyal to or afraid of Definitely Not Sauron. We still don't really know anything about Bolg, however, other than that he will do what Azog tells him. Azog is obedient and will not refuse orders from above. And Bolg will listen to Azog. Cut back to the woods outside Beorn's house. It is unclear if he is in control of this transformation, as this appears to be a werewolf-type effect. However, Gandalf previously informed us that he was under no spell other than his own, so it is unclear. Bilbo is awoken by giant bees, don't ask me why, and he has evidently slept well into the day, suggesting that maybe he is having trouble sleeping on account of a certain ring. Nori, who is the asshole of the company, suggests that they slip out the back door to evade Beorn, and Dwalin tells him he will not run from a fight. Gandalf reveals that his intention is to ask Beorn for help getting to the forest, believing that they will be hunted down and killed if they venture out alone. This means that Gandalf led the dwarves into this part of Middle-earth, knowing that Beorn existed, but temporarily forgetting, and upon being inexplicably hunted by Azog, his plan became to ask Beorn for help. Meaning that if he hadn't accidentally led them in the direction of Beorn's house, then I guess they die? None of this really makes much sense, does it? Anyway, Gandalf decides that he needs to speak to Beorn alone, although he decides to bring Bilbo with him too. He tells the dwarves to wait here for the signal. Through this dialogue exchange, Gandalf repeatedly reinforces how dangerous Beorn is.
This will require some delicate handling. We must tread very carefully. The last person to have startled him was torn to shreds. And don't come out until I give the signal.
Right. Wait for the signal.
And no sudden moves or loud noises, and don't overcrowd him. Remember? Wait for the signal.
This will, of course, lead to absolutely nothing momentarily. For now, though, Gandalf and Bilbo approach Beorn. Although Beorn is now in human form, he is pretty goddamn huge. Gandalf introduces himself, and Beorn says that he has never heard of him. Gandalf asks if Beorn knows of Radagast, and instead of answering, Beorn asks what Gandalf wants.
Well, simply to thank you for your hospitality.
As Gandalf thanks Beorn for his hospitality, Beorn notices Bilbo and asks,
He's not a dwarf, is he?
Well, no.
ratcheting up the tension even more because, quite obviously, the audience and Gandalf are well aware that there are indeed 13 dwarves hiding inside Beorn's house. The writers know exactly what they are doing here. I know exactly what they are doing here. What they are doing is incrementally dialing up the tension so that when the dwarves inevitably do the exact opposite of what Gandalf told them to do, it is theoretically even funnier. Anyway, as Gandalf is speaking, he does a thing with his hand, which then leads to the most obvious payoff in the history of payoffs.
There it is. Go, go, go.
And I must confess, and here are some more of our happy...
Go.
Nori and Ori.
Oh, Kili and Kili and Nori both before. And Bomber.
And the dwarves then march out in pairs to drag out the funnies. The problem with this is that it shatters the illusion of any stakes. You can't construct a joke on the idea that Beorn is super twitchy, unpredictable, violent, and hates dwarves, only to reveal that, nah, he's alright, there was never any danger to begin with. So then, we cut to Beorn being alright because there was never any danger to begin with, making me question why they decided to waste my time with the entire previous scene. It did not provide any new information, it was simply a painfully drawn-out joke that was fundamentally non-functional. Anyway, Beorn reveals that he knows of Thorin and of Azog, and asks why Thorin is being hunted.
Why is Azog the Defiler hunting you?
You know of Azog?
How?
Anyway, Beorn tells that his people lived in the mountains until the orcs came down from the north. Azog killed most of Beorn's family and enslaved the others for sport. So whilst I appreciate Beorn's backstory, this adds to the convenience I mentioned earlier of the dwarves being here in the first place, because now it is revealed that the guy Gandalf accidentally led them to just so happens to be highly motivated to help them against Azog. Anyway, Beorn says that they need to reach the Lonely Mountain before Durin's Day, which I don't know how he knows this unless they told him, in which case why is he just saying it back to them? But regardless, Gandalf reveals that his intention is to travel through Mirkwood in order to reach Erebor in time. Beorn strongly advises against this, claiming that there is a darkness there. Gandalf then further reveals that his plan is to take the Elven Road, which Thorin does not react positively to. Beorn tells the dwarves that these lands are crawling with orcs and that they will never reach the forest alive. So, if you have been paying attention, you will know at this point that Beorn dislikes dwarves and that he dislikes orcs. Luckily for our protagonists, he dislikes orcs more than he dislikes dwarves, and so he decides to help them.
But orcs I hate more. What do you need?
Because Beorn hates orcs, he decides to give Thorin and company 15 ponies, which seems remarkably nice of him, but I guess he just really hates orcs and is highly motivated for Thorin to not die, because I guess it will piss off Azog? Anyway, he tells Gandalf that they must leave the ponies before entering the forest, suggesting that he intends to pick them up and return them to his home. Beorn tells Gandalf that the orcs of Moria have allied themselves with definitely not Sauron. I think it's totally reasonable that Beorn could know this, although he says packs have been seen, which suggests that he had this information communicated to him from someone, rather than having seen it firsthand. Gandalf then asks,
What do you know of this sorcerer? The one they call the Necromancer.
Alright, quick tangent. They do not call him the Necromancer. No one calls him the Necromancer. Radagast described a necromancer as he observed this entity's ability to summon the dead, which is the definition of a necromancer. Later, after hearing Gandalf's explanation, Saruman declared a human sorcerer calling himself the Necromancer has taken up residence in Dol-Goldur. And now, Gandalf asks Beorn, what do you know of the one they call the Necromancer? This has come out of nowhere. The characters have all seemingly collectively decided that definitely not Sauron likes to be called the Necromancer. Anyway, Beorn tells that definitely not Sauron is definitely not what he seems, suggesting that he may definitely be Sauron. Beorn also says that the dead have been seen walking in the high fells of Rudar, and we see a quick flashback to the Witch King being buried, and Gandalf seems to realize that Radagast may have been telling the truth, even though he already had proof in the form of the Morgul blade. I'll come back to this later. Beorn asks Gandalf directly if the ancient enemy capable of summoning the spirits of the dead has returned, and Gandalf responds that Saruman says it is impossible for this enemy to ever return. Beorn suggests that Gandalf does not agree with Saruman, and then he tells him,
Go now, while you have the light.
oh yeah, orcs don't like sunlight, except for when they totally don't mind sunlight.
Your hunters are not far behind.
Hello again, complete disregard for distance and time. Azog was right behind them, but has since travelled hundreds of miles to Dol-Goldur and passed his mission on to Bolg, who has then travelled hundreds of miles back. Maybe Beorn was speaking generally when he said your hunters are not far behind, as he knows Azog was nearby the previous night. But the suggestion from this scene is that he can hear the orcs, and that they are indeed close by. The reason for this line is tension, as the threat is explicitly stated to be nearby. Unfortunately, this doesn't work because it disregards the passage of time. Okay, Dwalin is fearless. Gandalf forgets things and then remembers them as required by the plot. Accidentally wanders into the only situation that could save the dwarves' lives, and is creative with the truth. Beorn is twitchy, is unpredictable, keeps to himself, is the last of his kind, and is compassionate. Azog enjoys torture, and Boffer is retarded. Cut to the party arriving on the edge of Mirkwood at the Elven-Gate. They of course did not encounter any orcs because they have ponies now, I guess. They release the ponies as instructed by Beorn, and we then get a very strange line from Bilbo.
This forest feels sick, as if a disease lies upon it. Is there no way around?
This seems extremely out of character for Bilbo, as he would have absolutely no knowledge or understanding of dark magic at all. So my guess is that the only reason why this line exists is so as to plug the potential hole as to why they don't simply go around Mirkwood. And I like that they plug this hole. This is a hole that certainly needs to be plugged. But they could have done this without having Bilbo read lines that would have been more fitting for Galadriel or Gandalf. So anyway, as Bilbo fondles his ring, Gandalf finds a doodle of a big red eye, and then he decides that he needs to go to the tombs in the mountains to work out what the devil is going on. Okay, let's take a moment to go over what Gandalf actually knows, and I will try to do a more thorough job than Saruman did. I am going to assume that Gandalf fully trusts and believes Radagast and Beorn, as we have no reason to suggest that he does not. So, Gandalf knows that an entity capable of summoning the dead is residing within Dol-Goldur. He knows that this entity, or the spirit that it summoned, had obtained the Morgul blade belonging to the Witch King of Angmar. He knows that the Witch King and his blade were buried deep, and that the tomb was sealed with powerful magic. And he knows that Sauron, their ancient enemy, was also capable of summoning the spirits of the dead. Gandalf has enough information to conclude that somehow Sauron returned, and that he has resurrected the Witch King of Angmar. The movie treats this as him being suspicious that maybe there is some evil shit going down, but this does not fit with the information Gandalf has. Now he has found this drawing of the Eye of Sauron, and I have to wonder, as the film does not tell us, at least not yet, why this would mean anything to Gandalf. If Sauron is currently a spirit living in Dol-Goldur, does this mean that the Great Eye atop Barad-dûr does not exist yet? I know that the literal Eye of Sauron was created by Peter Jackson for the movies, but chronologically and within this universe, does the Eye of Sauron exist at this point? If it does, then how and why is Sauron also a necromancer living in Dol-Goldur? If it does not, then why does this vague drawing of an eye mean anything to Gandalf?
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Alright, back to the film. So upon seeing this drawing and recalling Galadriel's words,
"If our enemy has returned, we must know. Go to the tombs in the mountains."
So be it.
he decides that he must abandon the dwarves to investigate the high fells of Rhudaur, where the Witch King was buried. I am not entirely sure why he wants to do this. I can only assume that he wants to see for himself that the tomb is empty or has been otherwise opened. This doesn't necessarily suggest that he doesn't trust Radagast, but it's not very well explained at all. Anyway, Gandalf departs, indicating that the plight of the dwarves is less important to him than checking out this tomb. And Gandalf then tells Bilbo that he has changed, and he is no longer the same as when he left the Shire. And then...
I was going to tell you. I found something in the Goblin tunnels.
You need to be incredibly careful. You are tiptoeing on extremely thin ice here. If the ice breaks, you damage the Lord of the Rings.
Found what?
My courage.
Okay, so Bilbo decides not to tell Gandalf about the ring. Again, I am unsure why. From a meta perspective, this is because if Gandalf knows about the ring at this point, then the story breaks. But in universe, I can only assume that Bilbo felt drawn to its power already and didn't want to risk parting with it. It is already corrupting him. This has been hinted at previously, but it's somewhat at odds with the idea that hobbits are naturally resilient to the evil of the ring. Anyway, Gandalf tells Thorin that he will meet them at Erebor and to keep the map and key safe.
Do not enter that mountain without me.
He also warns the party that there is a stream in the forest carrying a dark enchantment, that the air is heavy with illusion, and that it will seek to lead them astray. He says that they must stay on the path or they will never find it again. So the Greenwood becoming corrupted by evil is a new phenomena. Radagast only discovered this in the previous movie. There is no way that Gandalf can know all of this unless he just kind of knows everything. Radagast did not have time to tell him as they were interrupted by the Warg attack, so I assume that we're supposed to gather that Gandalf walking around for a minute or two at the very edge of the forest was sufficient for him to read the magic and warn the party about the evil river and the elusive air. So as they enter Mirkwood, Thorin reminds the dwarves that they must arrive by Durin's Day, as this is their one chance to find the hidden door. Firstly, no, they can wait until next year if absolutely necessary. Also, they are all very much aware of this time limit, and Beorn has already mentioned this in a previous scene, so I am unsure why the writers decided that the audience needs reminding of this ticking clock element twice within the first 30 minutes of the film. So Gandalf potentially does not entirely trust Radagast and prioritizes investigating a lead on Sauron over Thorin's quest. And Bilbo wants to keep the ring to himself, is worried when Gandalf leaves them, and is conscious that he has changed since leaving the Shire. So the party ventures into the spooky forest. Time is of the essence, and this shot here has to be some of the least convincing visual effects in the trilogy thus far. Anyway, Thorin and Dwalin lead the way, and they are able to locate the bridge, but unfortunately, the bridge is broken. Thorin decides that they must find another way across, as he recalls Gandalf's warning about not entering the water. Kili is able to locate some vines, and Thorin says they should send the lightest first, the lightest, of course, being Bilbo.
That's a damn stupid thing to do.
So you might be thinking, why in the holy goddamn hell would you send the lightest first? Send the fat first. That way you know with certainty that you can all get across. Anyway, Bilbo then athletics his way across the spooky river and then shouts for the dwarves to stay where they are. Bilbo is realizing that something is not right with this forest, and it is implied that there is some kind of magic screwing with his brain. Unfortunately, upon seeing the lightest member of their party manage to cross the river, at great effort and by displaying some heretofore unseen gymnastic skills, the dwarves, all 13 of them, decide to cross at the exact same time.
Why me? Why me?
My mind goes back to the troll sequence in the first movie. I can buy maybe one or two of the dwarves being idiots. I can accept that. I cannot accept that characters like Thorin, Dwalin, and Balin are this goddamned retarded. Anyway, rather predictably, things start to go wrong. One of them touches the water by accident, the fat falls asleep, a deer arrives, and then Thorin tries to shoot it. Yeah, this whole sequence is very strange, very surreal, and distractingly pointless. Yes, the forest is evil and spooky. Why exactly it is fucking with everyone's brains is a different question. And now, the writers are going to have to find a way to cure them all so that the story can continue. Anyway, the fat falls in the river, the dwarves then fish him out, and the trippiness continues.
It's a good thing you're not a big fat guy, or this would be really difficult.
So at this point, I have to ask, if Gandalf knew that the forest was this bad, which we have to assume he did given his multiple warnings, then this further calls into question his decision to abandon them. The only way they are going to make it out is via blind luck. They are utterly screwed. They don't know who they are. They don't know where they are. They can't feel anything, and they can't remember what day it is.
Voices, can you hear them?
Nothing. I do not even know what day it is.
Is there no end to this accursed forest?
None that I can see.
They are experiencing a severe form of mass hysteria, and they are acting as though they are midway through a Jack Daniels and Monster Energy bender. Anyway, Thorin thinks he has found a way out, and Bilbo starts playing with a spider's web, meaning that these 13 dwarves and Bilbo are about to be attacked by giant spiders whilst tripping balls on evil magical air. As Thorin leads them away, Bilbo recalls Gandalf's warning to stay on the path. And this scene goes on for an extremely long time, as in nearly 10 full minutes of them wandering around tripping balls, seeing clones of themselves, and walking backwards. Bilbo then realizes that they need to find the sun in order to work out which direction they need to be going, so he climbs a tree, and upon breaking the tree line, he seems to be perfectly fine and lucid, a literal breath of fresh air. He then trips and falls a great distance. Obviously, he is perfectly fine afterwards because something physics. It's just a goddamn movie, okay? Stop being so critical. And then spider. Bilbo is then shrink-wrapped by this spider, and oh dear. I guess they all die now. Okay, Thorin trusts Gandalf's judgment and heeds his warnings. Makes some rather strange logical conclusions. And does not believe in luck. Boffer is skeptical. And Bilbo is incredibly athletic and agile, is less affected by the evil magic than the dwarves, and is clumsy. So, how will the dwarves escape? The short answer is by forgetting that they were all experiencing severe hallucinations and were borderline non-functional as a result of evil magical air moments ago, and by allowing them into the kiddies' ball pit of broken, consequence-free, video game-esque, physics-defying nonsense. But if you wanted the short answer, you probably would not be watching my videos, so here we go. Bilbo is pulled away to be eaten. He manages to skewer the spider using Sting. I'm not entirely sure how he managed to draw Sting while shrink-wrapped, but maybe he did this off-screen in preparation? I'm also unsure as to why this spider carried Bilbo away to eat him. The only possible explanation is that the spider wanted a private snack, but this is rather convenient as it directly facilitates Bilbo killing the spider without any of the other spiders noticing. Anyway, Bilbo then decides to use the ring, and I'm actually quite pleased to see him do this, although it means that his actions at the end of the first film are now even more questionable. He distracts the spiders whilst invisible, and kills one in order to save Bomber, who was about to be eaten. Whilst wearing the ring, Bilbo is able to hear the spiders speaking, in English, I assume because the ring is able to translate evil or something. And the spider he de-limbs whilst invisible says, "Where is it? Where is it?" And for absolutely no reason, Bilbo risks his life by removing the ring to say, "Here I am," before heroically stabbing it in the face.
It looks like he may commit suicide. Suicide is badass.
No.
This can only tell us that Bilbo is cocky, that he wants his enemies to see him kill them, and that he is willing to risk his life in order to show off. Bilbo has indeed changed. He is now an overconfident asshat, and this is a problem because the movie is going to forget that he is now an overconfident asshat. Anyway, for some reason that I simply cannot get my head around, after removing the ring and stabbing the spider in the face, it says, which then gives Bilbo the idea to name the dagger Sting. Why was the spider able to articulate the sensation of pain when there was a dagger in its face? More importantly, though, why was Bilbo able to understand what the spider was saying after he had removed the ring? I have absolutely no idea, but it allows the movie to explain where Sting got its name, so shut up and don't think about it. Anyway, Bilbo then proceeds to rescue the dwarves. Remember, all of the other spiders ran off because he threw a thing, and none of them have noticed any of the commotion thus far. Also, Bilbo does not put the ring back on, because I assume he's aware of the fact that he is not in any danger, because the script doesn't say that the spiders are back yet. Anyway, he rescues the dwarves. Need I remind you, they were just at the absolute mercy of evil creatures intent on killing them for the third time this trilogy, or in Thorin's case, for the fourth time. And they all then remove their webbing. Bilbo is attacked by a spider because of course he is an idiot and he was not wearing the ring, and as he falls he drops the ring into the forest floor. The reason this happens is to depower Bilbo for the upcoming cartoon fight sequence, because the stakes are now that much higher, supposedly, as Bilbo is unable to become invisible indefinitely. So the dwarves kill all the spiders whilst taking absolutely no damage themselves, making me care so much about their survival. And meanwhile, Bilbo looks for the ring. And I noticed something that I quite liked. Listen to Bilbo.
Where is it? Where is it? Come. Where is it?
His speech pattern and his breathing sound very much like Gollum.
Where is it? Where is it? Come. Where is it?
This is not overdone, this is subtle, and I quite like that they chose to depict this in this way. Bilbo then finds the ring and fights with some other forest-dwelling monster thingy in order to get to it. Then they unfortunately go one step too far and reiterate that Bilbo is becoming like Gollum.
Mine.
Yeah, they just couldn't resist. God damn it. Okay, Bilbo is overconfident and cocky, is becoming like Gollum. Gollum is reckless, is willing to endanger himself to save the dwarves, and is resourceful. And then Legolas surfs down a hill on a spider because, guys, he did the thing! He did the thing! And then the dwarves find themselves surrounded by elves. Unfortunately, Kili is still being eaten, but fortunately, Ladylas is here to save him.
Yay!
He begs her for a weapon to defend himself, and she refuses, evidently able to handle this all by herself. Legolas orders the dwarves to be searched, and then we get this.
Hey, give it back! That's private!
What is this horrid creature? A goblin mutant.
That's my wee lad, Gimli.
So, fan service is not necessarily a bad thing. Fan service typically refers to giving the fans what they want, but generally it has a negative connotation. The reason for this is that fan service will often, dare I say usually, be inserted in an unjustified manner, such as randomly name-dropping a particular character, or characters being in a certain location, or characters being in the film, period.
Scarif? They're going to Scarif? Why does nobody ever tell me anything, Artu?
The only reason why Azog was doing his evil speech in Weathertop in the previous movie, for example, is because OMG, it's Weathertop. Could Azog have been at Weathertop? Sure, but the problem with that wasn't that it couldn't happen within the world of the movies. Geographically, Weathertop is relatively close to Rivendell, which is where Thorin was, and Azog is obviously hunting Thorin, so it doesn't break anything by placing Azog at Weathertop at this point in the film. However, the problem with this kind of thing is that it distracts the viewer and detracts from the sense of immersion. The film becomes cheapened and reduced to a party trick as the viewer can clearly see the interference of the writers. I would not consider Bilbo writing the prologue in the first movie to be fan service, quote unquote, even though it will, of course, please the fans. Or maybe put another way, Bilbo's presence is fan service, but it's justified fan service. And therefore, in my view at least, excusable. The movie is not made worse in order to shoehorn in something that will pull viewers out of the movie. Now things get a little bit trickier to determine. Legolas's entire presence within this movie absolutely feels like fan service, despite it being marginally explicable, as Legolas is a Mirkwood elf, so plausibly he could have and would have been here at this point in time. You could absolutely argue that the only reason Legolas was not present in the Hobbit book was because Tolkien had not created the character until he wrote The Lord of the Rings. However, Legolas does not add much, if anything, to this adaptation. The only reason he is here is because he is a character people liked in The Lord of the Rings, and he has been inserted into a story in which he has no place, even if it is explicable that he could be in this location. Now onto the more obvious piece of fan service. Legolas personally searches Gloin, Gimli's father. The reason Legolas does this instead of any of the multiple elves present, despite Legolas appearing to be in charge of them, is because it facilitates him hearing the name Gimli.
That's my wee lad, Gimli.
The writers have put narrative progression on pause in order to name-drop things that the audience has heard before, as this information means absolutely nothing to Legolas at this point in time. Reminding them, of course, that they are watching a movie that is playing directly into their dopamine-addled monkey brains. Also, at this point in time, Gimli would have been around 80 years old, so Gloin calling him my wee lad is possible, but seems rather forced. Anyway, Legolas recognizes Thorin's blade, which he had taken from the troll horde in the first film, and he asks where he acquired it.
Where did you get this? It was given to me.
Legolas does not believe him, declaring Thorin to be a thief and a liar, and they escort the dwarves away. As they depart, Boffer realizes that Bilbo has disappeared. This is not the first time Boffer has been the only dwarf to notice Bilbo's absence, suggesting that he potentially has more of a friendship with Bilbo than the other dwarves, or possibly that he is simply more observant. Anyway, the dwarves are taken to the Woodland Realm, and Bilbo follows them whilst invisible. They are imprisoned, and Kili, evidently still struggling with being outed as a homosexual, implores Ladylas to fondle his fuckpole.
Aren't you going to search me? I could have anything down my trousers.
Luckily for him, Ladylas does not have blue hair and does not live on Twitter, so she leaves the Tide Pods under the sink and instead suggests that Kili might have been neutered.
Pussy.
Legolas then asks her why Kili is staring at her like a lost gay puppy, and she says,
Eorha. Benogoth. Pedithic.
And with that glance, dear viewer, the fated love triangle was set up. Okay, Legolas is incredibly skilled at fighting. hates dwarves, and is jealous and petty. Ladylas is also incredibly skilled at fighting. She distrusts dwarves, but does not seem to hate them, and wants to get beaten by Kili's love truncheon. Boffer looks out for Bilbo, and is observant. Kili is totally not gay, I promise, and is a sex pest. So the dwarves are not too happy about being imprisoned. Balin tells them,
This is no orc dungeon. These are the halls of the woodland realm. No one leaves here, but by the king's consent.
establishing to both us and the dwarves that escape is impossible unless the king permits it, or unless Bilbo, that crafty little weasel, has some tricks up his sleeve and rescues them for the 5th time. Anyway, we then meet the king, Thranduil, who is interrogating Thorin. Thranduil has deduced that Thorin's intention is not necessarily to retake Erebor or to kill Smaug, but to acquire the king's jewel, the Arkenstone, so as to be able to rule the dwarves. Thranduil then offers to help Thorin, claiming that he wants white gems of pure starlight from the mountain for himself. I assume that these are the same gems he tried to touch during the prologue, and I also assume these gems to be mithril. Thranduil says that he will let Thorin go if he returns what belongs to him. A deal which essentially amounts to promise to pay me and you can leave. So this I find interesting, as it informs Thranduil's actions during the prologue. He believes, for whatever reason, that the mithril the dwarves have belongs to him. Maybe he wants to do what Celebrimbor could not and go swimming in a dump truck filled with Silmaril goo. I have no idea. And if we assume that he is being honest, he is willing to allow Thorin to potentially unite the dwarf kingdoms if it means he can get his hands on some mithril. This isn't a particularly thorough explanation, but it does have potential in terms of motivating these two characters. My only real question at this point is why exactly does Thranduil believe the mithril belongs to the elves if it was uncovered inside a dwarven city? I'm sure this is explained somewhere in the books, but if it's not in the movies, then I'm afraid this may end up as a dead end. So, as Thorin of course has major beef with Thranduil, he refuses.
The negotiations were short.
And Thranduil then tells Thorin that he warned Thror of what his greed would summon, but that he did not listen, concluding that Thorin is just like his grandfather. He then says that 100 years is the blink of an eye for an elf, and that he is patient.
I'm patient. I can wait.
I mean, yeah, that is indeed what patient means. So Thorin is returned to his cell, and Balin is not too pleased to hear that Thorin told Thranduil exactly where to stick his deal. We then get a fake out.
I know you're there. Why do you linger in the shadows?
And it is revealed that Thranduil is actually speaking to Ladylas.
I was coming to report to you.
She suggests clearing out Dol-Goldur to prevent the spiders from spawning, and Thranduil, evidently aware of Dol-Goldur, says, "Lol, nah, it's outside our borders," suggesting that he does not particularly care about the sanctity of Middle-earth, or even more locally, the Greenwood/Mirkwood, despite the fact that elves in literally every other depiction of Middle-earth, including Rings of Power, have been shown to care deeply for nature, plus the fact that he lives in the Greenwood/Mirkwood. He explicitly says,
Will they not spread to other lands?
Other lands are not my concern.
Indicating that he is some kind of isolationist nationalist, again forgetting that he lives in the area that is currently being corrupted by dark magic from Dol-Goldur. He believes that the elves of Mirkwood will endure as other kingdoms rise and fall, even though there is an evil spooky castle on his doorstep that he has evidently paid absolutely no attention to. And then...
Legolas said you fought well today. He has grown very fond of you.
I assure you, my lord. Legolas thinks of me as no more than a captain in the guard.
Perhaps he did once.
So here we learn a couple of things. Legolas is Thranduil's son. Ladylas is of lower social standing than he is. Legolas wants to put his salami in Ladylas's maracas. And Thranduil does not want this to happen, asking her not to give him hope where there is none. And lo, the melodrama descends. Okay, Thranduil is civil with his enemy. Lacks honor, thinks Thorin is a fool, does not care about nature or preserving Middle-earth, is short-sighted, and is a controlling father. Thorin holds grudges and will not make the same mistake twice. Balin is practical and willing to negotiate. And Ladylas is a captain in the guard and is of lower social standing than Legolas. So we then see that outside the gate, Bolg and his merry band of orcs are sneakily stealthing their way inside. Bolg says that he knows of a way in that is unguarded. I assume that the reason why the elves do not guard all of their gates is so as to allow Bolg to get inside. Anyway, back inside the prison, it is love triangle melodrama sitcom bullshit time. I am not going to spend too long on this because this kind of thing just makes me want to put my head in the microwave. So Kili is playing with a talisman. Ladylas asks what it is, and he says it's a token given to him by his mother so that he would remember his promise to return to her. She seems confused by some of Kili's behavior, but is obviously gushing at the thought of his cocktail sausage.
You get dick.
At one point, he drops the talisman accidentally, and she returns it to him.
Whoops! Oh, I dropped my monster condom that I used for my magnum dong.
Oh no, my autistic brain can't handle this amount of sexual tension.
Loud noises!
Yeah, so the way this scene is framed is as if this is a private conversation, but there are 12 other dwarves within this prison, and there are presumably multiple other guards besides her. Speaking of, oh no, Legolas was listening the entire time. Tune in next week to find out who is sleeping with whose wife, who is going to die in a car crash, and who will get the girl. None of which I care about, and rather more critically, none of which has anything to do with The Hobbit. Okay, Kili is reckless and tries too hard, and Ladylas prefers cocktail sausages to das Schinkenwurst, ja? And Legolas is uber jelly. We then cut to Bilbo trying to acquire the keys to the dwarves' cells. We see the Keymaster, who is named Elros, and I have to assume this is not Elros as in Elrond's brother that was mentioned in Rings of Power, as this character is, I believe, canonically dead at this point, meaning that this is merely a random name drop, and another elf chatting about how good their wine is.
Say what you like about our ill-tempered king and his excellent tasting wine.
The Keymaster is hesitant to try any wine, saying that he is in charge of guarding the dwarves.
Come, Elros, try it. I have the dwarves in my charge.
And then, because I guess in order to consume wine you need to leave the keys to the cells hanging up on the wall, the other guy takes the keys and hangs them up on the wall. Bilbo obviously takes the keys that the elves literally just left lying there for him, and he rescues the dwarves. They start to cheer, and he quickly reminds them that there are guards nearby, which, yeah, I had also assumed that, but I have yet to see any evidence of any. I think they all hung their belongings on the wall so that they could drink some wine. Anyway, so the dwarves now out of their cells are somewhere inside the Elven Kingdom, and their armor and weapons have been taken from them. What they need to do is acquire their belongings if possible, and escape, ideally without anyone noticing them. So Bilbo leads the dwarves into the cellars where he acquired the key. Luckily, the aforementioned party elves have passed out because they can't handle their wine, which is kind of in line with The Lord of the Rings because elves, or Legolas at least, seemed unfamiliar with the sensation of being drunk, but it's also kind of not in line with The Lord of the Rings because Legolas was still able to win the drinking contest. Maybe I'm nitpicking here, maybe Legolas is special, I have no idea, but either way it's very lucky that these two guards were already incapacitated. Meanwhile, the other guards have discovered that the dwarves are gone. Bilbo tells the dwarves to get inside the barrels, and Dwalin objects.
Are you mad? They'll find us. No, they won't. I promise you. Please, you must trust me.
The dwarves do not actually listen to Bilbo until Thorin says,
Do as he says.
And so they do, as they seemingly have little choice. I have sneakily missed out a piece of information because it did not make sense to mention it until now. In the previous scene where Bilbo stole the key, the two elves were having a little discussion.
These empty barrels should have been sent back to Esgaroth hours ago. The bargemen will be waiting for them.
These empty barrels should have been sent back to Esgaroth hours ago. The bargeman will be waiting for them. So, not only did the Keymaster hang his key up and get drunk so as to allow Bilbo to free the dwarves, but he also said, hey buddy, you know these empty dwarf-sized barrels? Yeah, they're totally running late, so we should send them back. Also, we made sure there are 13 of them. Funny coincidence, but isn't that exactly the same number as the dwarves I'm meant to be guarding? Oh well, they won't escape if I hang my key up here on the wall and get drunk.
To call you stupid would be an insult to stupid people!
Okay, Dwalin does not entirely trust Bilbo. Thorin entirely trusts Bilbo. And Bilbo is unbelievably lucky. So now we come to the barrel sequence. I was not looking forward to watching this scene again. This one, from memory, was the epitome of the video game-esque chase sequences that I described in part 1. So, Bilbo dumps the barrels into the river. I assume this river is not receiving water from the evil river from earlier. Ladylas, meanwhile, has been informed of the dwarves' escape, and she enters the cellar and realizes they have fled down the river. Thorin thanks Bilbo, and the dwarves continue their getaway. I will note at this point that in the book, they float down the river in their barrels, then they climb out on the riverbank, and continue their journey. In the movie, well, we get an extremely prolonged roller coaster ride down some rapids. We are almost literally watching a theme park ride. Legolas sees this and orders the gate be closed.
Pull the lever, Crunk.
So the dwarves find themselves stuck. Luckily, or unluckily, the elves are attacked by Bolg and his orcs. At this point, do recall, dear viewer, that the dwarves do not have their armor and they do not have their weapons. Bilbo is the only one who is armed. So Kili sees the lever and heroically jumps out of his barrel, unarmed, to try and open the gate. Dwalin throws him a weapon taken from one of the orcs, which I do very much appreciate, as this is absolutely something I believe these characters would do. Dwalin is more practical than Kili, and Kili is reckless but also brave. So, as the elves get annihilated by the orcs, Kili fights his way towards the lever. Fili throws a knife at an orc to protect Kili.
What?
So this might appear to make no sense, and it doesn't really make any sense, but this was actually set up, albeit rather clumsily. We have already seen twice in this trilogy that Fili carries a lot of knives. We see the elves keep finding new knives on him after thinking they have found them all. This is a joke, but it also explains how he could have one on him now, because the elves didn't find all of them. This does, of course, rely on the elves being incapable of searching Fili sufficiently, but the fact that Fili is the only one who appears to still have a weapon makes this at least somewhat forgivable, as it was at least set up. So, anyway, Kili makes it to the lever, but unfortunately is shot in the leg by Bolg. You may be wondering why Bolg shot him in the leg, and it will become clear soon. Anyway, now unable to
pull the lever,
as he has been crippled, it is unknown how they will escape. All seems lost. Until Ladylas is here.
Yay!
And Legolas is also here.
Yay!
And together with some other elves, they cut their way through the orcs, allowing Kili enough time to
pull the lever.
And the dwarf-laden barrels then continue on their theme park ride. Kili manages to get back in his barrel, and they are pursued by the orcs. The elves also follow, nailing every shot spectacularly. I have no issue with this. Elves are essentially gods when it comes to this sort of thing. Honestly, it would have been weird for them to not hit every shot. The orcs missing every shot is another story. We then get a quick time event. And then we get this shit. Because adherence to slapstick physics is now the norm in Middle-earth, Bomber is able to harness this power and hit or kill 19 orcs during his misadventure. And that is before he does this. So after killing about 6 more orcs, Bomber leaps back into his barrel.
What?
Yeah, so there isn't a spare barrel. One has simply appeared right at this moment. There were and always had been 13 barrels. Anyway, this whole sequence from the Chop the Log QuickTime event all the way to Bomber's cartoonish axecapades was only possible because the dwarves were lucky enough to acquire axes from the orcs they were killing, whilst traveling at high speed through rapids. I have a problem with this because it relies entirely on absurd levels of luck and the orcs being idiots. To contrast this with Fili still having his dagger, it was, again, set up. The joke is, how can one dwarf possibly have this many knives? Again, this isn't great, as the luck element still factors in because him having a knife directly saves Kili's life. So this is very clunky, but at least there's something there beyond, and then they all got axes because they just kind of did. So the elves, including Legolas and Ladylas, are still pursuing the dwarves and cutting their way through the orcs. In the not-too-distant past, I said, I have no issue with this. Elves are essentially gods when it comes to this sort of thing. Honestly, it would be a little weird for them to not hit every shot. That is not an excuse for what comes next. So a little context is needed here. In The Lord of the Rings, we see Legolas do some pretty insane shit. Killing the cave troll while standing on its head, surfing on a shield, solo killing a Mumakil, all rather ridiculous feats of agility and coordination. The justification for this in The Lord of the Rings is that Legolas is an elf, and elves are depicted as being far superior to the other races in this regard. However, that does not mean that Legolas does not have limits to his abilities, as if he has no limits, then there are no stakes, and there is no tension, because he cannot fail. Let's keep it nice and simple. Legolas should absolutely be able to nail a headshot on an orc. Legolas should absolutely be able to do this while the orc is moving. Legolas could probably do this while he is also moving. What happens in this scene, however, is that Legolas nails at least 13 orcs, including a double headshot, while balancing on the heads of the dwarves who are flowing rapidly down rapids. This is far beyond anything we have ever seen any character do in either The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, or Rings of Power. Through this sequence, Legolas is invincible. There are no stakes and there is no tension. This Legolas would not have struggled for a moment when fighting the cave troll in Moria. He is Mike Tyson in a boxing ring with a 5-year-old. All we can do is smile as Mr. Tyson has some fun. However, I do vastly prefer this to the previous sequence with Bomber. Legolas's extreme godlike abilities are somewhat justified by the context. Bomber's are not. Legolas's survival is mostly contingent upon his own skill. Bomber's was contingent upon luck. In other words, it's less of a stretch to believe the Legolas sequence than it is to believe the Bomber sequence. And given that the Legolas sequence has a payoff, whereas the Bomber sequence does not, I have absolutely no idea why the Bomber sequence is even in the movie. Speaking of payoffs, let's talk about it. First, I will tell you what happens. As Legolas kills his 13th, I think, orc, one approaches him from behind and prepares to strike. Thorin sees this and throws his blade into the orc, saving Legolas. As you may expect, knowing that I like to talk for a long time about small things in movies, I have a lot to say about this. I think this is excellent from a character perspective, but terrible from a logistical perspective. I'll start with the good. Thorin absolutely fucking hates elves. He has absolutely no reason to like Legolas. Legolas has been an asshole to him the entire time. Legolas is currently, in fact, attempting to stop him escaping in order to lock him up for 100 years. Legolas is also the son of Thranduil, who personally betrayed the dwarves of Erebor, and I have to assume that Thorin would be aware of their familial connection. However, none of this overcomes Thorin's sense of honor. Honor appears to be Thorin's single biggest motivator. He is unwilling to sit back and allow an orc to stab Legolas in the back. So, he decides to throw his weapon, thereby disarming himself, in order to save the life of the elf who is directly standing in the way of his quest to retake Erebor. That is all fantastic. Now, the problems. Thorin having a blade in the first place relies entirely on blind luck. Thorin nailing the orc with it is a combination of luck and skill. Legolas not noticing that the orc was there is pretty catastrophic in terms of writing, because we had literally just seen him effortlessly mow through at least 13 orcs, and yet he does not even notice that this extra one is right behind him, even after Thorin nails it with his blade. Plus, as Rings of Power remembered for exactly one scene, elves in Middle-earth have fantastic hearing. Legolas does not turn around and acknowledge what happened at any point. What would have been far, far better, in my view, would be for Legolas to fail, and be in a position he cannot escape from. This would dial down his power level, and it would mean that he is aware that Thorin saved him, which could actually give Legolas some personality in this movie and provide a motivation for him allowing Thorin to escape, which would then introduce conflict between him and Thranduil. Unfortunately, none of that happens in the film, which means that as depicted, this moment is excellent for Thorin's character, but pretty disastrous for Legolas and for the logistics of the film. Anyway, the scene is not quite over yet, so there is a little more time for bullshittery. After killing the orcs, Legolas stops and does not chase the dwarves, even though he could absolutely keep chasing them and he has no reason not to want to do this, because remember, he does not know that Thorin just saved his life. Legolas did not even notice that the orc was behind him and was about to kill him. Speaking of Legolas not noticing when orcs are about to kill him, this orky boy approaches Legolas from behind and actually fires a shot at his head. This means that in the last few minutes, Legolas has displayed incredible physical and cognitive skill, and yet has also been snuck up on twice, and if not for the timely intervention of two separate characters, he would have been killed in both instances. Going by Legolas's own actions, he should be dead twice over. So anyway, Ladylas managed to shoot the orc's arrow out of mid-air. The cool thing about this is that I don't need to argue why this is a ridiculous thing to be able to do. As depicted, Ladylas would have needed to release her arrow at almost the exact instant that the orc did, if not earlier, depending on distance. Meaning that she was standing there off-screen with her bow drawn, ready to fire, and instead of shooting the orc, she decided to aim for where his arrow was going to be.
Dumb bitch.
So the reason this happened is that the writers thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if she shoots an arrow out of mid-air? The result, however, is that she is either both retarded and obscenely lucky due to her choosing the infinitely more difficult target, or she is unbelievably cocky and wanted to risk Legolas's life in order to show off, knowing that she would be able to hit the arrow mid-air. Or potentially she wanted to remove Legolas from the love triangle so that she can play Kili's skin trombone without feeling guilty about Legolas. Anyway, Ladylas approaches the orc with the intention of killing him. Legolas then prevents her from doing this and says they will keep him alive. We see Bolg continue to pursue the dwarves, still accompanied by many orcs, meaning that he had at least 100 with him originally, if not more, and further calling into question why exactly the elves stopped chasing the dwarves. All I can draw from this is that their priority was to kill enough of the orcs to scare them away, but that they didn't care to eliminate them entirely or to protect or recapture their prisoners. Okay, Bomber is unbelievably lucky and incredibly physically capable. Legolas surfs on things, is a god with a bow, does not have good hearing, is extremely reckless, and should be dead. Ladylas is a god with a bow, and is either retarded or incredibly cocky. Thorin prioritizes honor above all. Now it's time to see what Gandalf is doing. Hopefully, we'll get some kind of explanation as to why he wants to check out the Witch King's tomb. We see him approaching a mountain, and he finds an iron gate that appears to have been ripped open. He approaches the tomb, and hold on just one goddamn minute, we were told that...
Deep within the rock, they buried him. In a tomb so dark, it would never come to light.
This ain't that. Gandalf climbed a mountain, walked through a door, and he's here. This isn't deep within anything. I'm not suggesting that this tomb is easy to get to, but it definitely isn't anything close to deep within the rock in a tomb so dark it would never come to light. Anyway, after a cheap jump scare, we see that Radagast is also here. It seems as though Gandalf summoned him, presumably he found a butterfly somewhere, and Radagast then also climbed this mountain without Gandalf realizing he was just behind him, so that we could justify a cheap-as-balls jump scare. Either that or Radagast arrived first and was then hiding in one of the tombs so as to justify a cheap-as-balls jump scare. Anyway, we see that many tombs have been opened. 9, in fact. Gandalf says that the previous occupants have been summoned to Dol-Goldur, and Radagast does not believe that a human sorcerer would have been capable of doing so. This is contradictory world building. Saruman previously told us that necromancy, period, is impossible.
That's absurd. No such power exists in this world.
Saruman believed that the so-called necromancer must have been a human sorcerer because actual necromancy is impossible within this world, the sole exception being Sauron himself. Now, Radagast is saying that a human necromancer could not have summoned the Nazgul, meaning that necromancy is possible, but that he believes a human necromancer would not have been powerful enough to do this. The only way out of this contradiction is if either Saruman or Radagast are mistaken as to whether or not necromancy is possible. If these were two regular non-magical characters who had voiced differing views on this, then I wouldn't even bring it up. But these films have instead, seemingly accidentally, depicted two of the oldest and most powerful entities in Middle-earth as having conflicting views as to the viability of a certain type of magic. I do not believe this to be intentional, so my guess is that this was a mistake by the writers. Anyway, Gandalf then suggests directly that Sauron has returned, as the 9 only answer to Sauron. For now, I'm not going to go into whether or not this contradicts Gandalf's behavior at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, because that entirely depends on where Battle of the Five Armies leaves off. So, Gandalf is now very worried. He believes that Sauron is preparing for war, and that it will begin in the east, as he believes Sauron's mind is set on Erebor. This has been brought up a couple of times now, but I do not believe we or Gandalf have enough information to infer this. The only reason why Sauron would care about Erebor is because there is a dragon there who might be convinced to burninate the countryside, or if he wants to prevent Thorin from acquiring the Arkenstone and reuniting the Dwarven realms. It is possible that Sauron knows about and wants to do both of these things, but Gandalf seems to have known from the very start that Sauron would be interested in Erebor before he even suspected that Sauron had returned. Gandalf intends to return to Bilbo and the dwarves, saying, "I started this, they are in grave danger, and I cannot forsake them." This is true. He did send them on their quest, and now it turns out they are in far more danger than he had predicted. Radagast suggests that the whole world is in grave danger, prompting Gandalf to say,
"You want me to cast my friends aside?"
whilst almost literally looking directly into the camera at the audience members incapable of inferring this from what Radagast just said. So, this scene is a perfect example of unjustified dialogue. Radagast does not need to be here. It is possible that Gandalf might have wanted Radagast here as backup in case he finds anything dangerous, but he had no explicable means of communicating with Radagast. Radagast additionally does not actually do anything during this scene. This means that I assume he was written in so as to allow Gandalf to use him as an audience surrogate to feed information to the audience. This is perfectly fine when the dialogue is justified, but in this case, as Radagast served no other purpose and should not even be here, this is certainly a case of transparent writing. Also, I don't know why it took me this long to realize this, but Sauron cannot take physical form unless he has the ring. From what we have seen over the Necromancer, he is not a physical entity. However, he is far closer to being one than simply being an abstract spirit in the form of an eye on the top of a tower. So my question really is, if Sauron can manifest himself as the Necromancer, he can communicate directly with his underlings, he can summon the dead, and he can command armies to take over Middle-earth, why exactly does he need the ring? Okay, Gandalf feels responsible for the dwarves and Bilbo, and Radagast teleports when he wants to scare Gandalf and prioritizes the safety of Middle-earth over any one life. Cut to the dwarves who are now further downstream. They are in a nice slow-moving part of the river, having got past all of the rapids earlier. So they then abandon their barrels and, oh yeah, Kili got shot by an arrow. Kili claims to be fine, but Fili and Boffa are worried and want to bind his leg. Thorin says,
"There's an orc pack on our tail. We keep moving."
But then momentarily decides that they have time to bind Kili's leg anyway. Bilbo says that they should head to the mountain as they are so close, but as there is a lake between them and the mountain, this poses a problem. Bilbo suggests going round, and Dwalin says the orcs will run them down, and...
"We've no weapons to defend ourselves."
I mean, you did have weapons. The orcs practically gave them to you. Or does that not count because the action scene was filmed on a different day? Also, I'm not sure why Dwalin said...
"The orcs will run us down as sure as daylight."
Because I hadn't actually noticed thanks to all the other bullshit, but the orcs, once again, didn't seem to care about being in sunlight for that entire chase sequence. Anyway, Ori is emptying water from his boots. For some reason, he's not with the others, despite Dory repeatedly being shown to look out for him. And then Gaston finds him and readies his bow. This happens pretty quickly, so I'll just show you and then I'll get talky with it. Okay, this quick sequence tells us a few things. Gaston was able to approach Ori without anyone noticing. Dwalin was able to put himself between Gaston and Ori without Gaston noticing. Dwalin is willing to attack Gaston despite having no armor and being armed with a stick. And Gaston is extremely accurate with a bow. So, now at the mercy of Gaston, Balin notices that there is a barge behind him and asks if he is from Lake Town and if his barge is available for hire. I was going to criticize the living piss out of this, but on closer inspection, it does actually pass the relatively low bar of making sense. It appears that after jumping out of their barrels as a result of having lost the current, they immediately, within 30 seconds, are stumbled upon by the one guy who is able to help them, as Gaston is a ferryman, thus enabling their transit across the lake. However, we are about to see him load the barrels onto his barge, and the elves in the cellar previously said,
"These empty barrels should have been sent back to Esgaroth hours ago. The bargemen will be waiting for them."
meaning that Gaston has been here for hours waiting for these barrels. His presence is entirely justified. This does, however, raise a couple of questions. Notably, why does Thranduil rely on the men of Lake Town to sate his thirst for top-quality wine? I guess he does, even though, given what we know of Thranduil, this does not seem particularly likely. Perhaps more importantly, the fact that this movie turned the river connecting the Woodland Realm to Lake Town into an extreme rapids theme park ride means that Gaston or whoever else would have no means by which to bring the barrels of wine back up the river. Anyway, we then get another extremely jarring edit as we are now watching Gaston load barrels onto his barge, having apparently lowered his weapon after being extremely hostile to the dwarves moments earlier. He asks why he should help them, and Balin says his coat and boots have seen better days and that he no doubt has hungry mouths to feed. We then learn that Gaston has 3 children and that his wife is dead. Dwalin is fed up with Balin's negotiation, prompting Gaston to ask him what their hurry is, who they are, and what they are doing in these lands.
We are simple merchants from the Blue Mountains, journeying to see our kin in the Iron Hills.
We see briefly that Dory, the character who is simultaneously extremely polite and kind but also antagonistic and short-tempered, decide that today is Bad Dory Day, and he starts to move towards Gaston aggressively. He is held back by Nori. Anyway, as Gaston is unwilling to go along with Balin's charade, Thorin tells him honestly that
we need food, supplies, weapons. Can you help us?
Gaston deduces that, as he knows where the barrels came from, and as the barrels are heavily damaged by many arrows, whatever business the dwarves had with the elves did not end well. Gaston tells the dwarves that the only people allowed into Lake Town are people that the Master of Lake Town allows in, as the Master does not wish to anger Thranduil and lose his trade income. Balin offers Gaston double if he will smuggle them into Lake Town, and he accepts. So apart from the beginning, I actually quite like the introduction of Gaston. It shows Balin in particular as being apt in negotiating, which absolutely fits his character. It sets up the Master of Lake Town, as well as Lake Town's relationship with the outside world. It explains who Gaston is very clearly, and it explains why he is even here in the first place. It also, rather surprisingly, shows that the barrels were physically damaged from the cartoon chase sequence, which I honestly was not expecting. Okay, Gaston is extremely skilled with a bow, is confident, is poor, is suspicious, is used to dealing with strangers, is willing to break the law for money, and seems to be morally grey and motivated by money. Dwalin is reckless, protective, and short-tempered. Thorin is practical, Fili is sympathetic, Balin is good at building rapport and negotiating, Dory is aggressive and antagonistic, and the Master of Lake Town fears Thranduil and is wealthy. Cut back to Thranduil and Legolas, who are interrogating the orc. Ladylas is also here for some reason. Legolas asks why they were tracking 13 dwarves. The orc responds,
"No 13.
My presumption here was that he is about to reveal that they are specifically hunting Thorin, but unfortunately, I'm giving the movie too much credit.
No 13. Not anymore."
The orc continues that the young one, referring to Kili, has been stuck with a Morgul shaft. He says this whilst looking directly at Ladylas because he, of course, knows that she has a crush on Kili. He also says this for absolutely no discernible reason. Why would this orc want the elves to know that Kili has been shot with a Morgul shaft? Well, the only reason is to make the audience and Ladylas aware that Kili's injury is far worse than previously assumed, and to provide motivation for her to follow them to Lake Town. In other words, the orc is doing things he has no reason to do in order to further the plot. Excellent. Now, the other problem with this Morgul shaft. So the suggestion here is that this particular arrow that Bolg fired into Kili's leg is made from the same material as the Morgul blade wielded by the Witch King of Angmar. If we just take the Weathertop scene from Fellowship, Frodo is stabbed by the Witch King and Aragorn identifies the weapon as a Morgul blade, suggesting that there are likely more than one of these, otherwise Aragorn recognizing it would be far less likely, and he would presumably have said the Morgul blade if only one existed. My presumption when watching the Weathertop scene was that all of the Nazgul wield these blades, which may or may not actually be the case, but either way, it's irrelevant to the Lord of the Rings. In An Unexpected Journey, Galadriel and Elrond identify the blade Radagast took from Dol-Goldur as a Morgul blade, made for the Witch King of Angmar. This appears to suggest that maybe there are multiple Morgul blades, but they identify this particular one as belonging to the Witch King, meaning that, prior to the Desolation of Smaug, Morgul blades were heavily implied to be a particular armament used specifically by the Nazgul. But it turns out that Bolg has a Morgul arrow, presumably many Morgul arrows, meaning that whatever evil magic or poison or whatever it is that makes these weapons do what they do can just be copied and pasted into different weapons and used by anyone. This is possible, but it calls into question why this is the only example of this happening, and it also devalues the importance of Morgul weaponry in the universe. One way to partially fix this would have been to have Bolg stab Kili with a Morgul blade, which would not require that the filmmakers invent a new type of Morgul weapon. However, it would also mean that they can't disguise Kili's injury as a regular injury, only to later reveal it to be a particularly evil injury, and therefore surprise the audience and the characters and dial up the stakes. Giving Bolg a Morgul blade would still devalue the status of these weapons, as although Bolg is a servant of Sauron, he is not a Nazgul. And depicting him wielding a Morgul weapon of any sort begs the question as to why these weapons are not distributed throughout Sauron's forces. Anyway, the orc refuses to answer any further questions, and Ladylas gives us possibly the most cringeworthy line in the entire trilogy.
You like killing things, orc. You like death. Then let me give it to you.
Before Thranduil orders her to leave. Yeah, why are you even here in the first place? You are a nobody. The only reason you're here is because you are on the poster. Anyway, Thranduil reiterates that he does not care about one dead dwarf and asks again why they were hunting the dwarves in the first place, promising to release the orc if he complies. Almost as if the last couple of minutes could have been cut entirely. So, the orc doesn't really answer the question, but says enough for the conversation to continue.
Dwarf runt will never be king.
Legolas says that none dare enter Erebor while the dragon lives, and the orc says,
You know nothing. Your world will burn. Time has come again. My master serves the one.
And after revealing that Sauron has returned, Thranduil decapitates him.
Why did you do that?
Thranduil tells Legolas that their enemy intends to release a great weapon to destroy all before it. He then orders that guards be doubled and locks down the kingdom. This reinforces that Thranduil is extremely selfish and short-sighted, as he has just been informed that Sauron is massing an army, and his response is to lock down his city and not allow anyone in or out. He does not seem to have any intentions of investigating the threat or massing any kind of army of his own. This is not a criticism, I'm just establishing what he is shown to prioritize. We already know Thranduil only really cares about his own kingdom, so this is consistent with what we have learned thus far. Legolas then approaches the gate and orders the guards to seal it, and is then informed that Ladylas has gone out into the forest, presumably with the intention of helping Kili. The scene ends before we see what Legolas will do now. Okay, Thranduil is a liar, has no honor, and is extremely selfish and short-sighted. And Ladylas is a certified wordsmith, has a temper, is obedient, is willing to put herself in danger to save Kili, and believes she is capable of saving Kili. We then cut to the dwarves midway across the lake on Gaston's barge. We learn that he knows the lake extremely well, as he is able to navigate through obstacles in thick fog. Dwalin claims to have had enough of Gaston, suggesting that they throw him overboard. I know he is likely just venting his frustration, but this would be a colossally idiotic thing to do, given that their intention is to enter Lake Town, rearm and resupply, and then continue to Erebor. Bilbo then says,
Oh, I've had enough of this Libby Lake, man.
Bard, his name's Bard. How do you know? Lionstone.
No. I think you'll find his name is Gaston. Gaston then demands payment now, which Thorin refuses. And
if you value your freedom, you'll do as I say. There are guards ahead.
The boat then docks, and the barrels are filled with fish, thus allowing the dwarves to remain concealed. I am unsure how the barrels were filled with fish without anyone seeing the dwarves, unless Gaston personally filled every barrel, which is, I guess, possible. Anyway, they then approach the gates of Lake Town. Gaston is very friendly with the gateman, which makes complete sense, as this is his job, and he is allowed in. Except that, unfortunately, Greasebag McMonobrow is here to be an irritating little shit.
Consignment of empty barrels from the Woodland Realm. They're not empty, are they, Bard?
We don't yet know who this guy is, so for now you will have to simply trust me when I say that there is absolutely no reason why he is here checking on the gateman. He has simply spawned nearby so as to be an obstacle for the protagonists to deal with. Greasebag's problem is that Gaston's papers indicate empty barrels, whereas these barrels are filled with fish. One might have thought that someone as competent and experienced as Gaston could have foreseen this, but then again, I guess he wasn't expecting this antagonistic douchebag to just be kind of hanging out at the gate waiting for him. So, Greasebag says that as Gaston is registered as a bargeman, not as a fisherman, the fish he is transporting are illegal, despite the fact that, as implied twice already, the people of Lake Town are struggling for food, suggesting that Greasebag has no problem with peasants starving to death. He then orders that the barrels be emptied into the freezing lake, confirming that Greasebag has no problem with peasants starving to death. So, the setup for this moment of elevated tension and stakes is contingent entirely upon Greasebag being a comically insensitive and selfish bootlicker who for some reason has a grudge against Gaston. In other words, the only reason this is happening is because exactly the wrong person is in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. How inconvenient. Regardless, this presents Gaston with a conundrum and an opportunity for us to learn about his values. The dwarves are, of course, still inside these barrels and are about to be revealed. If this happens, then he will presumably be imprisoned, or at the very least lose his license to do his job, and thereby remove his ability to put food on the table. So, Gaston says that the people are starving, to which Greasebag says it is not his problem.
And when the people hear the master is dumping fish back in the lake? When the rioting starts? Will it be your problem then?
Prompting him to order the guards to stop dumping the fish. We then get a very strange line from Greasebag.
Ever the people's champion, eh, Bard? Protector of the common folk. You might have their favour now, Bargeman, but it won't last.
So this seems to suggest that Gaston isn't just some guy, he is known by the people, he is their hero, he has their favour, whatever that means, and he may be a Robin Hood type who looks out for the commoners. Okay, not sure we needed that. My presumption was that Gaston was just a guy with a job trying to feed his kids, but I guess that isn't enough. Anyway, what did this scene accomplish? Well, it introduced Greasebag McMonobrow, which didn't need to be done at this point, and it informed us that Gaston is something of a hero of Lake Town who just wants to feed the starving children and overthrow the ruling class. Okay, cool. So in other words, everything in this scene was either reiterating what we already knew or was wasting time with nonsense. Cut it. Holy shit. I also find it very amusing that Gaston is attractive, so of course we know that he's a good guy, and Greasebag is horrendously repulsive, so we know he is a baddie. Always good when character design is this on the nose. Or should I say, on the monobrow. Okay, Dwalin is very short-tempered and distrustful. Bilbo is friendly and talkative. Gloin is greedy, and Greasebag McMonobrow is comically inconsiderate, dislikes Gaston for his devilishly handsome looks, is unintelligent, and looks like an inbred mushroom. And Gaston is a man of the people and seems to be friendly with the citizenry. So we are then introduced to the Master of Lake Town.
The mood of the people, sire, is turning ugly.
They're commoners, Alfred. They've always been ugly. Not my fault they live in a place that stinks of fish oil and tar, jobs, shelter, food. It's all they ever bleat about.
Cool, okay, so this guy is a cartoon man with no dimensionality or intricacies to his personality. He is extremely greedy and extremely selfish. This is not a complex character. He is about as simple as you can possibly get. And that is not necessarily a problem, but I have absolutely no idea why these movies are going to dedicate as much time as they do to these two characters. They are the definition of caricatures. So the short version of this scene is that the Master seems to rule over Lake Town as a dictator. He doesn't appear to actually do anything whilst in charge, he simply wants to remain in charge. They are both worried about troublemakers and want to prevent the possibility of an election that could overthrow them. Greasebag is convinced that Gaston is the cause of this civil unrest, although at this point we have no idea why he thinks this, and he convinces the Master to allow him to make arrests. Then we get this.
Who would dare? Who? Bard. You mark my words, that troublemaking bargeman is behind all this.
Okay, so this reinforces the idea that Gaston is actually a known troublemaker, potentially leading some kind of people's uprising to overthrow their dictatorial leader. Whether or not he is actually doing this is unknown at this point, but the fact is both the Master and Greasebag are very aware of who Gaston is, and they intensely dislike him. Greasebag says that the people see Gaston as a leader, one who is admirable, modest, intelligent, handsome, and athletic. And the Master's response, as he eats cooked testicles whilst getting goo all over his face, because of course this character is disgusting for absolutely no reason, is...
Yes, he's clearly modeling himself on me. That's no crime.
Do you get it, guys? This man is a dribbling moron with no self-awareness. He isn't any of those things, but he thinks that he is. God damn it, I just can't handle this kind of utterly cringeworthy juvenile writing. Why is this in the movie? Is it so that the kiddies can cackle at this clown's absurd behavior whilst he eats the naughty parts of a goat? Anyway, the Master then speculates that maybe a law exists that prevents bargemen from asking questions, and Greasebag then says that he will write such a law immediately. Do you get it, guys? This is how the people in charge in real life are. They make up laws so that they can arrest the people that they don't like. So, we have apparently left Middle-earth and entered farcical slapstick social commentary land where the people in charge are evil, useless clowns who are utterly immoral, selfish, out of touch, physically repulsive, intellectually disgusting, utterly irredeemably stupid and incompetent, and they are trying to keep the people, personified by Gaston, in check by denying them access to food and jobs. Fantastic. Lake Town is a pantomime for 5-year-olds. So in The Lord of the Rings, there is a leader who is selfish and ignorant and embodies many of the same traits that the Master of Lake Town does. I am, of course, speaking about Denethor, the Steward of Gondor. The difference is that we understand very clearly why Denethor is the way he is. He is established as being a douchebag who highly values Boromir over Faramir, and when he learns of Boromir's death, he is taken over by grief and utter contempt for anyone else, including Faramir. In the films, Denethor is not a particularly complex character, but he is absolutely believable and does not exist simply to show how evil and useless the social elites are. The Master and Greasebag are not believable, and they are not characters. They are exaggerated and satirical to the point of coming off like absolute caricatured clowns, and their characterization thoroughly detracts from the realism of the world they appear in. I have absolutely no idea how or why a person like this would ever be in charge of anything. But maybe that's the point they were trying to make. Okay, the Master is greedy, oblivious, dictatorial, useless, and paranoid. And Greasebag is manipulative and cartoonishly evil. So, having arrived at his destination, Gaston empties the barrels and frees the dwarves. He pays the dockman for his silence and gives him the fish for free. This suggests that the amount of money the dwarves have paid him for transit is pretty goddamn high, as he just gave away a substantial amount of fish that he presumably paid for earlier in order to smuggle the dwarves. After paying the man for his silence, Gaston then leads the party through a crowd of people. Bear in mind that Gaston is well known in Lake Town. Everyone knows where everyone lives. It is a small town, and Gaston is a, quote, known troublemaker. And he is now leading 13 dwarves and a hobbit who entered the town illegally directly through what appears to be a town square. And rather predictably... Okay, so maybe this was Gaston's best move. I have absolutely no idea. But if this truly was the optimal method of smuggling 14 people into Lake Town, then I have absolutely no idea why he even tried. Maybe this would work with 1, maybe even with 2. But because Gaston has decided to smuggle 14 people at once in daytime directly through a market square, he has been caught. Anyway, the dwarves are surrounded by multiple guards and they subdue them. The townsfolk then help hide the bodies from the captain of the guard, and then for some reason, Gaston decides to provoke the captain.
Your wife would look lovely in this.
What do you know of my wife?
I know her as well as any man in this town.
This leads to nothing, as the captain then leaves, but implying that the guy's wife is a whore should reasonably lead to Gaston getting beaten and/or arrested. So I have absolutely no idea why he chose to do this, and I have no idea why this didn't happen. Gaston's son then tells him that their house is being watched, and we see a Rube Goldberg machine of people spying. And Gaston is somehow able to hide the dwarves somewhere, and then pretend to return home alone after a seemingly normal day's work. This tells us that Gaston is very aware of the methods by which the Master keeps an eye on the populace. So, how and where did Gaston hide the dwarves? Well, he hid them underneath the floor of Lake Town in the freezing water, and I guess told them where they can climb up through his shit can.
Da, why are there dwarves climbing out of our toilet?
We could have avoided the character-breaking stupidity and the toilet humor by having Gaston smuggle them directly to his house on a boat, and we are given no explanation as to why this did not happen. Lake Town is on a lake. They use boats to move around the town. Gaston's house faces onto the water. But rather than do what might make some amount of sense, he instead decided to march them through the town in broad daylight, get caught, and be forced to dunk them in the frozen water and have them emerge through his toilet. This is some exceptionally unintelligent smuggling. Anyway, Gaston's family clothed the dwarves to keep them warm, and Thorin notices a dwarvish wind lance. We learn from Balin that only a black arrow fired from a wind lance can pierce a dragon's hide.
The last time we saw such a weapon, the city was on fire. The day that Smaug destroyed Dale. Girion, the lord of the city, rallied his bowmen to fire upon the beast. But a dragon's hide is tough. Tougher than the strongest armor. Only a black arrow, fired from a wind lance, could have pierced a dragon's hide. And few of those arrows were ever made.
Had the aim of men been true that day, much would have been different.
And we then learn that Gaston's son believes that when Girion hit Smaug, he loosened a scale under his wing, and that one more shot would have killed him. Alright, so this sets up the means by which anyone is to kill Smaug, although I have absolutely no idea how anyone could know that this is what happened. Dwalin responds that he considers this to be a fairy story, which it simply has to be, because no one can know if a scale was loosened underneath Smaug's wing. Middle-earth does not have modern-day aerial tracking systems or binoculars, so Girion cannot have known that he popped a hole in Smaug's armor unless Smaug landed and was like, "Oh." This is all fine until the inevitable reveal that, yeah, actually this is what happened, meaning that someone somehow decided that Smaug was injured by the failed hits and turned out to be absolutely correct. But I will address that later. The dwarves then discuss how much time they have remaining. 2 days to reach Erebor. Otherwise they will miss the last light of Durin's day, and they will have to then wait until the following year to find the secret entrance to Erebor.
We must reach the mountain before then.
And if we do not, then this quest has been for nothing.
Except that none of them seem to be aware that waiting a year is an option. Durin's Day happens every year. I get that they don't want to wait a year, but if they fail in 2 days' time, this does not necessarily mean that their quest was for nothing. Anyway, Gaston returns with the weapons he promised them, and he presents them with a pile of cobbled-together junk, primarily made from fishing equipment. The dwarves, understandably, are not happy, and Gaston says,
"You won't find better outside the city armory."
Thorin and Dwalin share a glance, suggesting that they intend to break into the armory, but Balin suggests leaving immediately with the weapons they have, as time is very much of the essence. Oh yeah, Kili is injured. Anyway, moving on. During this conversation, Balin addresses Thorin by name, causing Gaston to realize who they are and what they intend to do. He rushes off, telling his son not to let the dwarves leave. Okay, Gaston is a dumbass. Dwalin is not superstitious. Balin is practical. And Kili is injured. Cut to Ladylas, who is following the dwarves' trail. Being an elf, she has excellent hearing and reacts quickly to a noise behind her. Legolas has followed her and for some reason also has his bow drawn aimed at her. Yeah, let's not get back into that. Legolas tells her that she cannot hunt 30 orcs on her own, and she counters saying that she is not on her own, suggesting that they both fancy their odds despite being outnumbered 15-1. Anyway, Thranduil is not happy at all about Ladylas disobeying him and leaving. However, Legolas says that if she returns with him, then Thranduil will forgive her. And Ladylas then tries to convince Legolas that they should be a part of this fight, suggesting that if they do nothing, then the darkness will come. In reality, she is making up excuses so that she can try to help the guy that she met that one time for about 30 seconds, because if you recall, although the orc did reveal that Sauron had returned, he did so after Ladylas had left, meaning that she is not aware of that information. She finishes by saying,
"When did we let evil become stronger than us?"
Which I assume is enough to convince Legolas to defy his father, plus I guess the fact that he wants to pork her fun bags. Okay, Ladylas is willing to manipulate Legolas, and Legolas is naive and has an ego. Cut back to Lake Town, where Gaston has found a tapestry showing the lineage of Durin, confirming his suspicion as to who Thorin is. The locals also discuss the dwarves they saw earlier, and one says,
What are dwarves doing in these parts?
It's the prophecy.
Prophecy?
Oh yeah, I remember that thing that was mentioned once and has absolutely no reason for existing. Unfortunately, as the locals discuss the hordes of treasure beneath Erebor, Greasebag McMonobrow is skulking about and taking in all of the above. One would think that maybe this guy has other underlings who can sleuth and spy. In fact, we already know that he does because we saw them earlier. So why he is personally doing this kind of dirty work, I have no idea, and can only assume it was done because it was easier to explain visually what was happening. We then see that Greasebag has returned to the Master and informs him of the prophecy, including that the rivers will run with gold. The Master dismisses this, but Greasebag suggests that the tales offer the people hope regardless of their truth. Because the Master is a baddie, he doesn't like the sound of this. Meanwhile, we see that the dwarves, all of them, have decided to break into the armory, and they intend to leave the mountain immediately afterwards. As we did not see any guards, I have to assume that there were none. Seriously, they are just inside the armory and no one saw them. Kili, of course, having been injured, falls down the stairs as he has recently been shot in the leg with a particularly evil arrow. This alerts the guards that until now did not exist, and oh dear, whatever will they do now? I am left wondering why they brought Kili with them, as in why they took him into the armory when they could have left him outside. It makes perfect sense for Thorin, Dwalin, and Bilbo specifically to be the ones inside the armory, but it makes absolutely no sense for Kili to be present. I know that Kili is very much downplaying his injury because he doesn't want to trouble anyone, but even given this fact, they all know that he has just been shot in the leg. And by allowing this injured dwarf into the armory, giving him all the weapons and asking him to walk down the stairs, they have now alerted the guards.
That's a damn stupid thing to do.
I'm struggling, guys, I really am. So all of the dwarves are caught by the guards in a matter of seconds, almost as if they were literally in the same building. Now under arrest, the guards bring the dwarves to the Master. I have no idea why they do this. The dwarves were caught committing a crime, and so they go to prison. Unless every criminal is brought before the Master, I guess. So, Evil McGee and Evil Magoo both say nasty things about the dwarves because they are evil, and Dwalin takes offense and reveals who Thorin is.
Desperate bunch of mercenaries if ever there was, sire.
Hold your tongue. This is no common criminal. This is Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thor!
Thorin then gives a speech to the people of Lake Town about how he remembers the city as a great and prosperous trade hub.
I remember this town in the great days of old.
This was the center of all trade in the north. I would see those days return.
Alright, so for some reason the two evil clowns and their guards allow this to continue before Gaston arrives and says,
Death! That is what you will bring upon us. Dragon fire and ruin. If you waken that beast, it will destroy us all.
You see, Gaston is very worried about Smaug being awoken after having guessed at what Thorin's intentions are. In response, Thorin says that if they succeed, he will share his wealth with all of them, and the crowd cheers. I understand what they were trying to do here, and there are ways that it could have worked. The people of Lake Town are desperate, hungry, and poor. The reason for this is that their leader is evil for the sake of being evil. And so the people think, actually, you know what, a risk of being burned alive by a dragon is acceptable if I will get some money out of it.
I like money!
The reason this does not work is because no character is currently or has ever addressed the prospect of disposing of the dragon. Thorin speaks as if Smaug is already dead, and there is just a giant corpse inside Erebor. No one ever asks, okay, but seriously, how the fuck do we kill that thing? It's a goddamn kaiju. Their plan, as laid out in the first scene of this film, is to break into Erebor via the secret door, have Bilbo somehow locate and escape with the Arkenstone without waking the nuclear bomb that is sleeping inside, for Thorin to reconvene the 7 Dwarven Kingdoms and be like, hey, okay, I've got the Arkenstone now, so you got to do what I say, and then for him to lead said armies to Erebor to kill Smaug and live happily ever after. At no point is the prospect of the consequences of failure ever addressed by Thorin, or by Gandalf. So, fittingly, it is also not questioned by the people of Lake Town who hear the word money and decide, yeah, I like this guy.
I like money!
Gaston is the only character behaving reasonably in this scene. Anyway, Greasebag asks why they should believe Thorin, as they, of course, know nothing about him.
Why should we take you at your word, eh? We know nothing about you. Who here can vouch for your character?
I find myself surprised, Greasebag. This is an entirely reasonable question to ask. You may have the smallest of gold stars. So, who can vouch for Thorin? Well, the only people present who know him, to any degree, are the other members of his party, and perhaps Gaston, but Gaston currently stands in opposition to Thorin. So anyway, Bilbo vouches for Thorin.
What?
And they take Bilbo at his word, despite not knowing who Bilbo is either. So once again, we have a logistical nightmare, but one that works quite well from a character perspective. Bilbo is taking a risk by declaring publicly to an entire town that Thorin is a good and honorable dwarf who will keep his word. And Thorin, appropriately, is very thankful for Bilbo doing this. But as no other character seems capable of addressing the prospect of the dragon, Gaston says,
Have you forgotten what happened to Dale? Have you forgotten those who died in the firestorm? And for what purpose? The blind ambition of a mountain king. So riven by greed, he could not see beyond his own desire!
And he then insults Thorin's grandfather, saying that he was blinded by ambition and that this caused what happened. And then things get even more complicated, perhaps rather needlessly, as evil McGee reveals that Girion, the Lord of Dale, who failed to kill Smaug as seen twice before in the form of flashbacks, was Gaston's ancestor. Meaning that the bargeman that was waiting for barrels from the elves that the dwarves then decided to pay to smuggle them across the lake not only turned out to be some kind of Robin Hood-esque troublemaker seeking to lead an uprising of the proletariat, but he is also the great-grandson of the guy who failed to kill Smaug 170-odd years earlier. This is the guy that the dwarves just so happened to stumble across. The conveniences are stacking up. Greasebag, ever the bootlicker, then tells how Girion fired and missed many times, humiliating Gaston, and prompting the people to turn against him and to lean in favor of money once again. Having lost the ear of the crowd, Gaston approaches Thorin and says,
You have no right to enter that mountain.
I have the only right.
So, I kinda want to like this. Kinda want to, being a rather important caveat, because honestly, this is shit. But that said, I do like the idea of Thorin and Gaston both having very strong reasons to believe that they are correct, and being unable to convince the other to budge whatsoever. Gaston's ancestry also does go some way to explaining why he in particular is worried about the dragon. Anyway, Thorin then directly addresses evil McGee and asks if he will share in the great wealth of the dwarves. Of course, evil McGee is evil and thus really likes money, so he agrees to trust Thorin, even though he really has no idea who Thorin is. He has no proof of anything. He only has another guy he doesn't know vouching for him, and he has a very vague prophecy that he learned about 5 minutes earlier. And then everyone starts celebrating their impending riches. No one seems to even consider the prospect of evil McGee and Greasebag keeping it all for themselves, which seems like 100% exactly, entirely, unequivocally, and absolutely what these two would do. Okay, Kili does not want to worry anyone. Thorin does not choose his men carefully. Is good at playing crowds. And claims to be generous. Dwalin is proud and speaks his mind. Bilbo deeply trusts and respects Thorin. And Gaston is worried about the dragon and is ashamed that his ancestor failed. The following morning, the dwarves are preparing to leave. They appear to have been given armor and weapons by the people of Lake Town, and it appears to fit them surprisingly well, which is rather confusing. Thorin tells Kili that he will slow them down and that he should not come with them. Presumably, Thorin has realized that Kili is more injured than he previously let on as a result of the previous night.
I'm going to be there when that door is opened. When we first look upon the halls of our fathers, Thorin.
Kili, stay here. Rest.
Oin decides to stay with Kili, and Fili then says,
Uncle, we grew up on Tales of the Mountain. Tales you told us. You cannot take that away from him.
I cannot risk the fate of this quest for the sake of one dwarf.
Philly, don't be a fool.
You belong with the company.
I belong with my brother.
So this reveals that Fili and Kili are Thorin's nephews, that they are, as assumed, much younger than Thorin, and that they have never been to Erebor. Thorin is unwilling to risk his quest to facilitate a wounded Kili coming along for the ride, and this decision prompts Fili to leave the boat to be with his brother. Okay, we're about 5 hours into this trilogy, and we are finally getting some characterization. This tells us that Kili looks up to Thorin, has dreamt of retaking Erebor, and feels betrayed that Thorin deems him incapable of helping due to his injury. It also tells us that Fili prioritizes the well-being of his brother over helping his uncle retake their home. Anyway, then the dwarves leave, and I'm going to skip over this because it's more unnecessary funnies at the expense of character. Boffa overslept, he wakes up, misses the boat, and then asks,
Did you miss the boat as well?
Kili!
And we then see that Kili is suddenly not doing particularly well. Meanwhile, Greasebag tells Evil McGee that his popularity has risen as a result of how he handled the dwarf situation. We then get a bit of insight as to why Evil McGee did what he did. He says that either the dwarves will succeed and will give him a lot of money, or Smaug will eat them. I mean, I can think of more than a few alternatives that have a reasonable chance of occurring, at least as far as he could be aware. The whole thing could be a lie, meaning that he just gave a bunch of criminals weapons and armor and allowed them to leave Lake Town. Or Thorin will succeed, but will not give any gold to Lake Town because Evil McGee has no reason to believe that Thorin would keep his word. Or Smaug will wake up and go on a murderous rampage. Or Thorin will succeed and return to Lake Town with an army to depose him on account of him very obviously being a selfish, entitled, useless, and sadistic piece of human excrement. And then...
Please wait! Please, we need your help. My brother is sick.
Ha! You really should have thought of that before you became peasants.
And of course, Evil McGee wants nothing to do with this because he is of course selfish and inconsiderate, but Oin persists that they need medicine.
Do I look like an apothecary? Haven't we given you enough?
Alright, yeah, I've had it. These two are two of the worst characters I have seen for a very long time, and I'm not even referring to their behavior from a moral standpoint. The utterly surface-level simplicity of their characterization, how bluntly on the nose literally all of their dialogue is, their clownish pantomime-esque performances.
But random, these two characters are supposed to be goofy and exaggerated and silly. That's why they cast Stephen Fry. They're clearly there for a bit of comedy and levity and to contrast with their behavior with the heroes.
Retarded alter ego, I am warning you, if you keep interrupting me with these retardisms, I will deport you. Silly and goofy characters are not always a bad thing, and of course neither is quote-unquote comedy, but I cannot accept that characters like this exist in Middle-earth. And if they do exist, I cannot accept that they would ever be in charge of anything. These two are easily the worst characters in this trilogy. Azog and Bolg are positively Shakespearean by comparison. So then, because what the fuck else were you expecting? Evil McGee says,
What this town needs, Alfred, is a good purge.
Certain bargemen, sire.
Precisely.
Okay, Kili admires Thorin, feels betrayed by Thorin, and does not want to miss out. Kili prioritizes Kili's safety over helping Thorin. Family matters more to him than glory or gold. Oin is caring and prioritizes helping the wounded. And the Master of Lake Town thinks himself intelligent, is selfish, and is evil. This next part of the film features a handful of sequences that are intercut, so I will tackle them independently. Firstly, what exactly has Gandalf been up to? The last time we saw him, he had just explored the high fells of Rhudaur, and his final line in that scene was acknowledging that Radagast wanted him to abandon his friends for the greater good. Well, it turns out that Gandalf has done precisely that, and we see him and Radagast arrive at Dol-Goldur. He tells us that there is a spell of concealment in effect.
Which means our enemy is not yet ready to reveal himself.
Yeah, about that. Your enemy did reveal himself directly to Radagast in the previous movie. Had that not happened, Gandalf would currently be with the dwarves, Radagast would be none the wiser, and Sauron's evil plan would be going swimmingly. Anyway, Gandalf, temporarily afflicted by being a retard, tells Radagast to send word to Galadriel.
Tell her we must force his hand. I'm going in alone. On no account come after me.
Wait, Gandalf! What if it's a trap?
It's undoubtedly a trap.
Okay, god fucking damn it. This kind of thing is how you ruin characters. Gandalf is now canonically a fucking idiot. He knows that Sauron has returned. He knows that he needs help to defeat him. And yet, rather than wait for backup or venturing inside with Radagast, he decides inexplicably to go in alone. The only possible defense of this is that he suspects but does not know that Sauron has not yet acquired the ring and therefore has not regained his full strength, and that Gandalf is himself extremely powerful. Regardless, this is a catastrophically stupid thing to do given the information Gandalf has. Anyway, Gandalf explores the spooky castle for a bit and then casts a spell commanding the evil to reveal itself. We see that Azog is nearby and is aware of what Gandalf is doing. I have no idea why the audience needed to see this because we already know that there is a metric ton of evil inside Dol-Goldur. We don't need to see Azog say to an orc, "Oh man, it's Gandalf, he's here, I hope he doesn't find us, lol." Shortly afterwards, Gandalf is attacked by an angry crackhead. After a scuffle, Gandalf subdues the crackhead and casts a spell on him.
Who?
Yeah, so this guy is Thrain, Thorin's missing father, who has not been seen since the Battle of Moria. I am very much expecting some answers. Namely, why is he rabid? Why is he in Dol-Goldur? And why did he attack Gandalf? So anyway, Thrain recalls that he has a son, and Gandalf then says,
"Come, we must leave."
As if he forgot his actual reason for being there in the first place. It might appear to make sense for him to want to get Thrain to safety as they are good friends, but remember, the entire reason why Gandalf is here to begin with is because he decided to abandon his friends in the name of the greater good of Middle-earth, making his actions here somewhat contradictory. Gandalf notices that Thrain's finger, along with his ring of power, has been taken. I still don't know why Sauron would want to physically possess any of the rings of power, given how they seem to work, but as this is not elaborated on, at least not in this film, I will continue. Thrain then asks Gandalf if he kept them safe. This would have been sufficient, given that they are both standing in an evil castle, and they are both very much aware that there is evil magical shit going down right here, right now. But Thrain then continues.
Have you kept them safe, Gandalf? The map and the key?
Yeah, why not just explain your entire goddamn plan to Sauron personally, you useless pair of cretins?
I gave them to Thorin. You'll be proud of him. He has taken up the quest to reclaim Erebor.
God damn it. Anyway, Thrain is not happy to hear this at all, saying that no one must ever enter that mountain. So Thrain then leads Gandalf out of Dol-Goldur, saying that Sauron and Smaug are in league with each other. How he knows this, and how this could even be possible, is entirely unknown. Then Azog ambushes them and disarms Gandalf, telling him that he is too late and that it is done. What specifically he is referring to here is unclear. Gandalf defends himself and demands to know where Sauron is. Gandalf then sees maybe 100 or so orcs with some wargs and decides to retreat. So he teleports away with Thrain, but then encounters this. So this appears to be Sauron's current form. This is the Necromancer. Anyway, Thrain is understandably scared shitless and asks Gandalf to tell Thorin that Thrain loves him.
Will you tell my son that I loved him? You will tell him yourself!
And then we get some rather hilarious tonal inconsistency. Pro tip, if you're going to have a dramatic death scene where a character is dragged into darkness by a being of pure evil after asking that their friend tell his son that he loves him, don't, for the love of God, use a motherfucking Wilhelm scream. Anyway, I guess Thrain is dead now, but for real this time, and I have no idea what the point of any of this was. Why, logistically, was he here? Did he go crazy after the Battle of Moria and then just kind of end up in Dol-Goldur? Was he a prisoner? If so, why? Why did Sauron keep him alive only to kill him now for seemingly no reason? And, in a meta sense, what is the purpose of including this character in this story? He seems to serve absolutely no purpose, and then he dies for seemingly no reason whatsoever. Anyway, Gandalf then tries to defend himself from the darkness with his light, but is overwhelmed. We then see a great eye and a familiar being emerges. Gandalf's staff is destroyed, and he recognizes that Sauron has indeed returned before he is captured. We later see him alive in a cage, and he watches Sauron's forces march out of the fortress. Unfortunately, there are no butterflies present, so for the time being, here is where Gandalf will remain. I have many things to say on this, because this appears to take a steaming dump on The Lord of the Rings, but because I don't yet know how this trilogy ends, I will hold off for now. Regarding this scene specifically, as Gandalf did this to himself, I have absolutely no sympathy for him. Also, what the hell was Sauron's plan here? Gandalf can absolutely die, and I cannot think for 1 second why Sauron would not want Gandalf to die. The suggestion was that if Gandalf did not have his staff, Azog would have killed him. So winding back to the previous movie, let's see if any of this makes sense if we assume that this is part of some kind of grand plan. From the beginning, Sauron starts spreading evil throughout the Greenwood deliberately, which catches Radagast's attention. Radagast then investigates Dol-Goldur, the Witch King attacks him, and they allow Radagast to leave with the Morgul blade, again, deliberately. Radagast warns Gandalf of the spooky castle, Gandalf learns of the origin of the Morgul blade, and he then meets Radagast at the High Fells of Rhudaur, and they both decide to investigate Dol-Goldur once more. Sauron cannot have known that they would do any of this. Gandalf then sends Radagast away to ask Galadriel for help, and inexplicably enters the fortress alone. Again, Sauron cannot have known that this would happen. Gandalf could have returned to Dol-Goldur with Radagast, Saruman, and Galadriel, plus a few hundred elves. Luckily, however, Gandalf is momentarily a retard so as to allow Sauron's plan to continue. Sauron then allows Gandalf to enter Dol-Goldur, and allows him to temporarily rescue Thrain. He then manifests as a literal shadow, kills Thrain, and overpowers and imprisons Gandalf. So, if Sauron's intention was to capture Gandalf, then his means by which to bait him here relied entirely on Gandalf's own stupidity as well as other things outside of his own control. If this is part of some kind of plan, it is horseshit. For now, my best guess is that this is not part of any kind of plan, and that Sauron never intended for anyone to know about what he was doing in Dol-Goldur until it was too late. Unfortunately, this means that we have traded an insane plan that relies on Gandalf being a dumbass for Sauron accidentally being a dumbass and revealing himself earlier than intended. So Gandalf prioritizes his duty as protector of Middle-earth over the individual safety of Thorin or Bilbo, but also prioritizes the individual safety of Thrain over his duty as protector of Middle-earth. Is reckless and is an idiot. Okay, Thrain is a crazy hobo, is terrified of Smaug, loves his son, and dies. And Sauron has insane plans that make no sense. Cut to Thorin and company, who are approaching Erebor. They cross the lake, climb hills, and cross a vast barren wasteland. Bilbo notes how quiet it is, and Balin describes how this area used to be a forest. We then see the ruined city of Dale, a reminder of what could well happen to Lake Town if they fail. Thorin then reminds everyone that they have until sunset that day, a few hours, to locate the door. Bilbo states that they were supposed to meet Gandalf here and suggests that they wait. However, Thorin is unwilling to wait any longer due to their strict time limit. As Gandalf has evidently been delayed, Thorin is more than willing to disobey Gandalf's earlier advice.
Do not enter that mountain without me.
They then search for the hidden door by following the map, and they seem to be a bit stuck until...
Up here! You have keen eyes, Master Baggins.
Bro, it's fucking huge. So anyway, they climb up and find what appears to be a door. I am deathly sorry that Fili is not here to witness this. He seemed so excited by doors. They then wait for the last light of Durin's day to reveal the keyhole. No keyhole is revealed. The dwarves become increasingly frustrated, and Thorin orders that they break it down, before Balin says it cannot be forced open due to the powerful magic upon it. The last light of Durin's day fades, and Thorin despairs.
The last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole. That's what it says. What did we miss?
What did we miss?
Curiously, he at no point tries to blame Elrond for mistranslating the map, because if you recall, only Elrond could read it. Elrond was at the time suspicious of their intentions, so he plausibly could have lied to them, and Thorin, of course, is prejudiced against elves. He instead seems utterly defeated, asking what they could have missed.
We've lost the light. There's no more to be done.
Oh, beans. Same time next year, then. Anyway, Bilbo can't believe that they're giving up, and Thorin drops the key and hands the map to Bilbo. Thorin appears to have literally let go of his dreams of reclaiming Erebor. I might be wrong here, but last time I checked, Erebor had a front door, not just a back door. And the last time we saw this front door, it had a dragon-sized hole in it. Just saying. Anyway, the dejected dwarves leave, but Bilbo is determined and tries to work out what they missed. He realizes that the last light referred to the light of the moon, which ties in with the fact that the map could only be read by moonlight. And Bilbo calls for the dwarves to return. Thorin then inserts the key and opens the door. He and Balin share an emotional moment as they are reunited with their home. Gloin then sees a carving and reads,
Herein lies the seventh kingdom of Durin's folk. May the heart of the mountain unite all dwarves in defense of this home.
And what's that?
The Arkenstone.
Arkenstone? And what's that?
This, quite unfortunately, tells us that this is the first time Bilbo has been told about the Arkenstone. This means that Bilbo has not been told at any point why he is actually here, as his purpose is to retrieve the Arkenstone. This means that everything that Bilbo has done in both of these films so far has been under the express knowledge that he is a burglar, but that he never once asked, so why exactly do you guys need a burglar? Thorin then reveals to Bilbo that his mission is to burgle the Arkenstone from Smaug, and it sure was nice of him to finally explain to Bilbo what the hell he is doing here. Balin tells Bilbo that in truth he has no idea what he will find down there, and suggests that Bilbo can turn back if he wants. But Bilbo says that he promised he would try, so that is what he will do. Bilbo then proceeds into Erebor alone. Everything is silent, and this effectively shows how quiet and clever he will need to be if he wants to avoid waking Smaug. Bilbo then sees a literal sea of treasure, and I ask once again how he can possibly be expected to find the Arkenstone even if Smaug was not here. There have to be billions of coins here. Anyway, we see him pick up a few precious-looking jewels before concluding that they are not what he is looking for. The tension in this scene is rather excellent, and the way Smaug is revealed is pretty fantastic. First, his closed eye is uncovered after Bilbo accidentally causes a shower of coins to trickle down the pile. Then, his nostril is revealed when he exhales. Then, Bilbo realizes how gigantic Smaug is as parts of his tail are slowly uncovered. Smaug then opens his eye, and Bilbo decides to put the ring on to conceal himself. Smaug is able to smell Bilbo, and identifies him as a thief, deducing that there is no other reason why anyone would be here. Smaug seems to have extremely acute senses, as he appears to directly identify where Bilbo is despite him being invisible. Smaug senses that Bilbo is carrying something precious, either detecting the presence of gold, or the fact that the ring is an extremely powerful magical artifact. And then, this next part is unclear, we see a flash of the Eye of Sauron, and next thing we know, Bilbo has removed the ring and Smaug is able to see him. I am going to assume, because the alternative makes zero sense, that Bilbo did not willingly remove the ring here. With one exception, Bilbo has not been depicted as suicidal. The use of the Eye of Sauron imagery directly suggests that Sauron may have caused this to happen, although how is entirely unknown. It is also possible that Smaug has some kind of a connection to the ring, either because both he and Sauron are great evils, or because, as we learned from Thrain previously, Sauron and Smaug are already in league with each other. Again, the film has not communicated whatsoever how this is possible, or how Thrain knew about it, but honestly, that's the best I can do with what the film gives me. I have no other explanation for why Bilbo removes the ring. In a meta sense, the reason is because it is easier to communicate what is going on to the audience if Bilbo is visible, plus it allows for a more nuanced back and forth if Smaug is able to see him. Anyway, Bilbo then speaks to Smaug for the first time, and I will read this instead of playing the clip, because I am honestly fed up of dealing with YouTube's automated copyright system. I did not come to steal from you, O Smaug the unaccessibly wealthy. I merely wanted to gaze upon your magnificence, to see if you really were as great as the old tales say. I did not believe them. This, once again, shows Bilbo as able to keep relatively calm in an extremely dangerous situation. He is also able to think quickly when facing a gigantic dragon in the eye that could kill him in an instant.
Do you now?
Truly, the tales and songs fall utterly short of your enormity, O Smaug, the stupendous.
He continues to try to play into Smaug's ego, causing Smaug to ask,
Who are you? And where do you come from? May I ask?
And I find it interesting that Smaug has all the power in this scene and yet decides to have a chat with Bilbo. He seems genuinely curious as to who Bilbo is, as well as how and why he is here. He is not simply an evil monster who wants to eat anything that moves. And just when I thought this scene was going rather well, Bilbo looks down and, oh, look, it's the Arkenstone.
Just lying there.
What a coincidence. Anyway, Bilbo tells Smaug that, I come from under the hill, and under hills and over hills my path has led, and through the air I am he who walks unseen. Bilbo seems to be trying to confuse Smaug, or at the very least buy himself some time. He will remain alive for as long as Smaug is entertained by their conversation. During this back and forth, Smaug takes a good whiff of Bilbo and then asks,
And what about your little dwarf friends? Where are they hiding?
Bilbo attempts to deflect this by claiming that he has no affiliation with dwarves, but Smaug continues, becoming increasingly angry.
You have nice manners for a thief and a liar. I know the smell and taste of dwarf. Did you think I did not know this day would come when a pack of canting dwarves would come crawling back to the mountain?
During his tantrum, Smaug knocks over one of the pillars in the chamber, causing the dwarves outside to hear it.
Was that an earthquake?
That, my lad, was a dragon.
The stage is set. The dragon is awake, and I will come back to this scene in a little bit because there are other things that need mentioning. Okay, Bilbo does not give up easily, does not ask questions, keeps his word, is incredibly brave, and keeps calm in high-stress situations. Thorin does not reveal information until he absolutely has to. And Smaug is vain, egotistical, curious, self-obsessed, and arrogant, believes he cannot be defeated, and does what he wants because he can. Cut back to Lake Town, where Oin, Boffer, Fili, and Gaston are trying to fix Kili.
I need herbs. Something to bring down this fever.
Nightshade. Fever few.
They're no use to me. Do you have any Kingsfoil?
Yep, it's the thing we know from the other movie. Get it? Anyway, Boffer rushes off to try and find some. A while later, they feel the reverberation of Smaug knocking over the stone pillar, clearly putting them in the crosshairs for what will likely come later. Gaston is particularly worried, as his fears may be about to come true. Fili tells Gaston to leave, to save his children and escape before it is too late. Gaston responds,
And go where? There is nowhere to go.
And his daughter says the dragon will kill them, before Gaston replies,
Not if I kill it first.
I actually really like this. Gaston has been keeping one of these black arrows, presumably the only black arrow, in his kitchen and using it as a shelf for various utensils. This means that he has lived his entire life prepared for Smaug's return. And he is willing to do what he can to save Lake Town. We have already seen that Gaston is extremely skilled with a bow, but no character ever questions what will happen if he misses with his one remaining black arrow. It is just kind of assumed by everyone, including him, that he will be able to hit Smaug in his weak point that he knows about because reasons. Anyway, he tells his son to distract the guards so that he can get to the Windlance to prepare for Smaug's arrival. So this, rather unfortunately, means that Gaston is going to have to deal with Evil McGee and Greasebag's unbridled incompetence and short-sightedness in order to save Lake Town. They are not going to let Gaston do what he needs to do in order to save the city, including them, because they are irritating and selfish imbeciles. And, like clockwork,
We're guards.
The guards notice Gaston and start chasing him. He hands the black arrow to his son and says he will deal with the guards.
You're under arrest. On what charge? Any charge the master chooses.
And evidently his master plan was to attack the guards.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
We then get a brief chase sequence, which is easily the best chase sequence in these films so far. It lasts for 13 seconds. It uses no obvious visual effects, everything is taking place in camera, and there are no cartoon bullshit physics. I believe that this is happening, likely because this is what happened in front of the camera on the set that day. Why this couldn't be the case at any other point in these movies is honestly depressing. Anyway, Gaston's run from the law is cut short because Greasebag was, once again, in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. He trips up Gaston, and Evil McGee whacks him in the face with a plank of wood. You see, we couldn't have the guards apprehend Gaston. We had to make sure the two main baddies do it personally, even though they have no reason for being here whatsoever. They were just hiding here, hoping that Gaston would run past, I guess. Okay, Oin is experienced as a medic. Fili is sympathetic. Gaston has been waiting for Smaug's return for his entire life, is brave, and is unlucky. And Greasebag uses underhanded tactics because of course he does. We then return to the dwarves outside Erebor, who are worried about Bilbo's safety now that Smaug has awoken.
Give him more time.
Time to do what? To be killed?
You're afraid.
Thorin then accuses Balin of being afraid, possibly to hide the fact that he must also be very much afraid of Smaug.
Yes, I'm afraid. I fear for you. A sickness lies upon that treasure hoard.
God damn it, not this again. So Balin isn't actually afraid that Smaug might kill everyone he knows. He is afraid that the magic gold pile might make Thorin go crazy. I don't know why this crazy gold subplot is in the film. It is not necessary. I also have no idea why Balin is bringing this up now. Thorin has shown no signs of craziness or an intense desire to do a swan dive into his Scrooge McDuck mountain of cash. Balin seems only to be bringing this up to remind the audience that this was something briefly established in the first movie. He continues that the Thorin he knows would not hesitate to rescue Bilbo, and Thorin responds,
I will not risk this quest for the life of one burglar.
So Balin seems to be suggesting that Thorin is acting out of character by risking the life of one of his companions in order to finish his quest. Thorin claims to not want to risk the quest for the life of one, except that, in this case, if Bilbo is killed, the quest fails, meaning that Thorin should be highly motivated to make sure Bilbo is not killed, if for no other reason than to ensure that he recovers the Arkenstone. Maybe Thorin does have the crazies, maybe the writers thought this made sense, I have no idea. My presumption is that Thorin is supposed to be being a bit of a dick right now, but that his actions are cold and calculated based on risk versus reward. What is actually happening, however, is that Thorin is risking the failure of his quest by saying that he will not risk the failure of his quest. Anywho, Balin is offended and shocked that Thorin will not even name Bilbo, referring to him only as the burglar. Meanwhile, we see that Smaug has worked out that Thorin, specifically, has sent Bilbo in here to acquire the Arkenstone.
Just lying there.
This makes a degree of sense. Smaug can smell the dwarves on Bilbo, and Thorin wanting the Arkenstone is the most likely reason for any dwarves being present. Smaug then says that Thorin's quest will fail, as a great darkness is coming, referring to Sauron, confirming that Smaug is very aware of Sauron's presence. Smaug tells Bilbo that he has been used as a means to an end.
You are being used. You were only ever a means to an end. The coward Oakenshield has weighed the value of your life and found it worth nothing.
I assume that Smaug has temporarily forgotten that he is himself being used as a means to an end by Sauron. Interestingly, we see Smaug accidentally knock the Arkenstone away from Bilbo a couple of times during this sequence, but at no point does he seem to realize that the Arkenstone is there. He knows that the Arkenstone exists, and he believes, correctly, that Bilbo is there specifically to retrieve it. And yet at no point does he actually say, "Aha, you crafty little bugger, I see you going for that there Arkenstone. Avast, thief." Anyway, we then see that there is a nice little hole in Smaug's armor, meaning that the fairy tale mentioned earlier that no one could possibly know to be true is in fact true. Meaning that someone made up something because I guess it made them feel good, and it turned out to be absolutely correct. Sloppy writing does not even come close. And then it gets worse.
So it is true. The Black Arrow found at Smaug.
What did you say?
So Bilbo has just said, out loud, something that only serves to benefit the least attentive audience member. He has no other reason to say this. Yet the script demands that he does to make sure everyone is following along. Bilbo and Smaug then notice that the Arkenstone is right next to them, and Smaug says,
I am almost tempted to let you take it, if only to see Oakenshield suffer.
He wants to see Thorin be destroyed and corrupted by the Arkenstone, establishing that the Arkenstone does indeed have some kind of magical corruptive property. So, which is it? Is it the giant pile of gold that drove Thror crazy, or was it the Arkenstone? The Arkenstone would make more sense, and if it is revealed that, yes, it was totally the Arkenstone, then this calls into question why, in the prologue, Bilbo claimed that it was a generic love of wealth that drove Thror mad, if he in fact knew that it was the Arkenstone. At this point, however, it turns out that Smaug has had enough of Bilbo.
So tell me, thief, how do you choose to die?
And Bilbo is able to escape by using the ring. Smaug has seemingly forgotten that he has an incredibly good sense of smell, and also that he was able to detect and potentially control Bilbo when he was wearing the ring. Instead of doing this, he decides to spray and pray. Okay, Thorin is an idiot. Bilbo is an idiot. Balin is compassionate and is offended by Thorin's coldness. Smaug is sadistic and is forgetful. We then return to Lake Town, and oh dear, it looks like Bolg and his 30 orcs have somehow managed to cross the lake and arrive here. The orcs have not only managed to enter Lake Town, but they have also managed to skulk about on the rooftops without anyone noticing. We then see that Gaston has been imprisoned, and we see that Boffa is still trying to locate Kingsfoil for Kili. The orcs then attack Gaston's house. I assume that they deliberately waited until they had located it before randomly attacking people, although this calls into question how exactly they did locate it. What would have made the most sense would have been for them to follow Boffa as he returns with the Kingsfoil. This would still be very convenient, but that's irrelevant because that's not what happens. The orcs attack before Boffa has returned, meaning that I had no idea how they knew where the dwarves were hiding. Anyway, Oin and Fili are able to fight the orcs back while Boffa is pursued in the streets. Boffa is about to be killed, but he is saved by an arrow. Yay! Ladylas and Legolas arrive and whip the piss right out of the orcs. This fight scene certainly has problems, notably the impeccable timing and the lack of damage any of the heroes sustain, but honestly, this is the first good fight scene in the Hobbit movies. Let me explain. This fight scene takes place in an environment that the audience and characters are very familiar with. It is also taking place in an extremely tightly enclosed space, unlike the seemingly infinite cartoon lands of the Smaug Chase, the Barrel Chase, or the Escape from Goblin Town. There are also children involved who are unable to defend themselves from the orcs, meaning that the characters are not merely fighting for their own survival. There is more at stake. The orcs appear to be actors in suits rather than fully CGI monkey people, meaning that the fighting feels far more realistic than in any of the other scenes in these movies. The actors do not appear to be doing flashy moves, stabbing at thin air for the cartoon goblins to be added after the fact. Anyway, an orc escapes and informs Bolg that Thorin is not here, and Bolg then orders the orcs to fall back. Then we get this.
And everything seemed to be going so well.
Alright, throw out all the compliments I just gave this scene. Evidently the filmmakers were unwilling to do a fight scene without a funny decapitation facilitated by cartoon physics. Meanwhile, Kili is seemingly about to die. Legolas asks Ladylas to come with him as he is still of the belief that they are here to kill the orcs, not to save any particular dwarf. She moves to leave, but pauses after hearing Kili in pain. Legolas either does not notice or does not care that Ladylas has not accompanied him, probably so as to ensure that he is not present for the following scene. So Ladylas takes the Kingsfoil from Boffa and states,
"What are you doing?"
I'm going to save him.
She orders the dwarves to hold him down, and the children also help. She then recites something in Elvish and appears to heal Kili.
That this boy will walk. Tommy! We are gonna save you, and you are gonna walk with the Lord. Tommy! Devil be gone!
Okay, so fundamentally, I have no issue with her being able to do this. However, in The Lord of the Rings, Kingsfoil was something that Aragorn thought might help to slow the poison. It was not a cure. Both he and Arwen knew that for Frodo to survive his wound, he would need Elvish medicine and to be brought to Elrond. We don't actually see what Elrond does, or if it even is Elrond specifically who heals Frodo, which is totally fine because we don't need to see it happen. However, if Ladylas is able to grind up some Kingsfoil and speak some magic words, then I don't think it unreasonable to suggest that Arwen could have done precisely the same thing in Fellowship of the Ring. The only way around this is if Arwen, the Lady of Rivendell and daughter of Elrond, knows less about healing magic than Ladylas, a self-described lowly sylvan elf. Anyway, she finishes healing Kili, who is lying with his head on a pillow made of nuts, which maybe is symbolic for what he wants to do to Ladylas. Anyway, he seems barely conscious, rambling about how in love with Ladylas he is, and I still don't care. Anyway, Bolg orders that the orcs send word to Dol-Goldur that Thorin has reached Erebor. I must have missed the scene where the orcs learned that Thorin has reached Erebor, as all they should know is that Thorin is not in the one house they just attacked. Bolg stays behind with a couple of orcs to deal with Legolas. We don't see any civilians of Lake Town at all during these scenes. Indeed, the only people in Lake Town who seem to be aware that there are 30-odd orcs and a bunch of wargs inside their town are Gaston's two daughters. We then see the wargs leave over a large bridge, and hold on one gosh darn moment, this is the first time we've seen this bridge. This was never mentioned, and it was never even implied that there was any way into Lake Town other than by boat. But I guess the orcs went the long way round, as did Legolas and Ladylas, and they entered via the bridge, and still no one saw them? No guards? Well, my bad. Evil McGee is incompetent and dedicated the entirety of his town guard to apprehending Gaston. Anyway, it's time for Legolas and Bolg to have their boss fight. This fight is also not bad. Bolg demonstrates that he is much stronger than Legolas, quickly disarming him, and it descends into a fistfight. Although he evidently went to the Big Chungus school of how to kill elves, as he repeatedly throws Legolas into things instead of ripping his head off and shitting down his neck. After a while, Legolas is attacked by 2 more orcs, and Bolg takes this opportunity to leave, as I assume he has remembered that his mission is to kill Thorin, not Legolas. Upon realizing that Bolg has made him bleed his own blood, Legolas pursues him on horseback, and that is where we leave these characters until the next film. Okay, Ladyless saves what she loves instead of fighting what she hates, and Bolg is a brick shithouse. Intercut with the Lake Town sequence is the Erebor sequence. We see that Thorin has actually decided to venture inside, even though the last time we saw him, he said,
"I will not risk this quest for the life of one burglar."
So I guess he changed his mind off screen? Seems like an important thing to show, but okay. So we follow Thorin inside, and he sees the vast wealth of Erebor before bumping into Bilbo.
We're alive. Not for much longer. Did you find the Arkenstone? The dragon's coming. The Arkenstone. Did you find it?
This tells us very clearly that at this point Thorin's priority is the Arkenstone. When Bilbo does not give him a straight answer, Thorin blocks Bilbo's escape.
Oh, we have to get up. Thorin.
The suggestion here seems to be that Thorin has the crazies as a result of all the gold and or the Arkenstone. But practically speaking, he needs the Arkenstone in order to reunite the dwarves and retake Erebor. If they leave now without Bilbo having retrieved it, then I would argue their quest has in fact been in vain because they will have achieved nothing. But Thorin is angry and sweaty, so he's just crazy lol. Before Bilbo can reveal that he does not have the Arkenstone, as remember it was on the floor when he put the ring on and fled, so there is no way he could have it, Smaug appears right as the other dwarves enter the mountain. Wait, okay, so if they're all here, why did Thorin come in on his own? Was it so that he could threaten Bilbo without anyone taking issue with this and therefore communicate to the audience that Thorin is totally crazy? Yeah, probably that.
Pretty pathetic, huh?
So Smaug attacks the dwarves, partially hitting Thorin, although none of them are injured, and we see them sneak through much of Erebor, which is utterly dark and empty, having been abandoned now for well over 100 years.
We've given him the slip. No. He's too cunning for that.
Given how gigantic and silent Erebor is, it should be impossible for Smaug to sneak up on them. Okay, so either Smaug is playing with his food, which is certainly possible, or the writers have forgotten that he has an incredibly sharp sense of smell. There is no way that Smaug does not know that the dwarves are there. Also, there is no way in hell that Smaug is able to move this quietly. He is between 2 and 3 times the size of a 747, and the film has already shown how the smallest sound can reverberate in the vast chasms of Erebor. Shortly afterwards, the dwarves find a mass grave of their people, who presumably starved to death while waiting for someone to save them. This is pretty tragic, and it serves as a second wind for Thorin.
To try to reach the mines. It might last a few days.
No. I will not die like this. Cowering. Clawing for breath.
And he hatches a plan to defeat Smaug by leading him into the forges of Erebor, conveniently skipping over the fact that the last time we saw him in relative safety, his absolute priority was interrogating Bilbo so as to ensure the recovery of the Arkenstone. Now, it seems as though his goal is to kill Smaug. This appears to make sense, although only partly. If Smaug is defeated, then whether or not Bilbo has the Arkenstone becomes irrelevant. Thorin would be able to freely search Erebor to locate it, which this film has decided is something that is not impossible to do. However, this hinges upon them successfully defeating Smaug. My impression, given how borderline unhinged Thorin was in the previous scene, was that he was absolutely willing to risk Smaug unleashing hell, provided it did not get in the way of him recovering the Arkenstone. So anyway, the dwarves split up, and then this happens. So, until this point, I have had my criticisms of Smaug, but he has come across as intelligent. He is not someone who can be easily fooled. He is not a wild animal. He is cunning and rational and logical, despite being vain and arrogant. So why exactly he blindly chases the dwarves as they go, "Hey you, follow me," I have no clue. This is the kind of thing I would expect from the half-witted trolls in the first film, not from Smaug, chiefest and greatest of calamities. So whilst being led around like a Scooby-Doo villain, Smaug intermittently forgets that he can breathe fire. As a result, he is unable to catch a single dwarf, despite his immense size, his surprising agility given his size, and his very keen sense of smell. At one point, Thorin accidentally runs the wrong way because, remember, he now has the crazies, and Smaug sneaks up on him because, again, the film has tricked the viewer into accepting this as a possibility, and Thorin is then pursued by Smaug. He survives this. And this. And this. And they are then able to regroup in the furnace. Dwalin and Balin have realized that their plan will not work because the furnaces are stone cold. I am unsure as to why they expected anything else, as Erebor has of course been abandoned for about 150 years. Luckily, however,
They've no fire hot enough to set them ablaze.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
they realize that they can totally kill Smaug with the furnace by tricking Smaug into turning the furnace on. The problem with all this is that the Smaug in this action sequence is not the same Smaug that was having a nice chat with Bilbo. That Smaug was very intelligent. This Smaug is a giant evil monster with no personality. He chases the good guys because that's what evil monsters do. And the world of the movie buckles in order to allow him to do this. Anyway, Thorin taunts Smaug, resulting in him breathing fire into the forge. Everyone survives this. So I don't need to rely on real-world physics to call bullshit. Even if we assume that, sure, hiding behind a pillar means you can bypass the various laws of thermodynamics, I can call bullshit on this by using the rules that the movie has already laid out. Earlier, we saw the ground literally start heating up as a result of Smaug's fire breath. It almost appeared to be turning into lava, and the dwarves were, of course, avoiding it. Smaug's fire is hotter than ordinary fire. It is so hot that it causes the ground to become unstable, and the dwarves believe it to be hot enough to kickstart a long inactive forge. Come to think of it, I do distinctly recall learning that evil fire was not hot, so I guess this is further evidence that the writers of Rings of Power did not watch these movies. Anyway, Smaug's fire hits the forge, and... Oh, cool. Okay, so the forge is just on now. Granted, I don't know jack shit about forges, but my guess is that putting fire in one when it's off does not magically make it be on. Regardless, the dwarves start working the bellows to heat up the gold inside the forges, whilst Smaug attempts to break his way through the gate. I am wondering why he doesn't continue to breathe fire into the room, as this would prevent the dwarves from doing any of this, but I am willing to assume that there is some kind of limitation to his fire breath. I'm happy to accept that he can't simply do it forever. Either way, it definitely feels like he could be trying just that little bit harder to kill the dwarves. Anyway, Bilbo pulls the lever. And this appears to seriously piss off Smaug, and it also appears to cool him and presumably prevent him from breathing fire for a bit. The dwarves throw some improvised explosives at him, which have little to no effect, and then the dragon single-mindedly pursues Thorin. Then this happens. Okay, so firstly, time and space bent themselves to make this cable move closer to Gloin than it was in the previous shot. Secondly, I have no idea what this cable is made of. It was made by dwarves, so how can I possibly say that cutting through it with a sword is ridiculous? Well, this cable is being used in a forge, and it is bearing a huge amount of weight. Enough weight to stop Smaug in his tracks. Therefore, there is no way that a cable this strong can be cut by one tap with a sword. This is like cutting through a cable car cable in one strike using a bread knife. No fucking way. Meanwhile, the gold has heated up to the point of becoming liquid, and Thorin opens the outlets to channel it to its destination. He then charges Smaug with a wheelbarrow, and I'm unsure at this point what exactly his plan is. Okay, so I guess we're just ignoring the transitive properties of heat in this film, aren't we? The only way this is possible is if the dwarves have developed heat-resistant wheelbarrows, although, saying that, they appear to have developed cables that can bear hundreds of tons of weight, but also be cut with a sword, so maybe this isn't all that inconsistent. So Smaug, unable to follow Thorin, decides to chase Bilbo instead. Because Smaug is now a big clumsy dum-dum, he remains unable to catch anyone at any point. So a quick discussion about Smaug and why this fight/chase sequence does not work at all. As I have already mentioned, Smaug has a very clear personality. In addition to this, his voice, provided by Benedict Cumberbatch, is fantastic.
I kill wherever I please, and none shall stop me. So tell me, how do you choose to die?
He is a fully fledged character. His performance is as good as, if not better, than Andy Serkis as Gollum in the first film. His dialogue is also fantastic, and I do not think it is a coincidence that the writers decided to keep the discussion between Smaug and Bilbo, as well as the riddles scene with Gollum, mostly intact from the book. So it may come as a surprise to you when I say that during the subsequent fight/chase sequence, Smaug does not utter a single word. He is a silent killing machine intent on eating the dwarves. The only personality present within Smaug during this sequence is entirely from the animation and the visual effects. And don't get me wrong, the visual presentation of Smaug is still pretty incredible even 10 years later. And the amount of expression the animators were able to achieve is rather astounding, but my point is that they stripped away a core component of his character in order to do a giant monster chase sequence. I do not think it unlikely that this entire sequence was added after the script was written, and potentially even after Benedict Cumberbatch had recorded his lines and finished his motion capture. This is speculation, but either way, the end result is very jarring, as it does not fit the character of Smaug that was very precisely set up in the previous scene. Anyway, upon reaching the Gallery of the Kings, Smaug is allowed to speak once again.
You think you could deceive me, Barrel Rider? You have come from Lake Town.
And he deduces that Bilbo came from Lake Town. This, I think, is reasonable, as even if Smaug cannot smell humans on Bilbo or the dwarves, he already knows that they at one point traveled in barrels. So the connection is certainly there to be made by someone as intelligent as Smaug.
Perhaps it is time I paid them a visit.
I don't really have a problem with this either. It may at first seem as though
this is the one thing we didn't want to happen.
But I think it makes an amount of sense for Smaug to want to do this. He has been unable to catch any of the dwarves as they have taunted and humiliated him whilst running literal circles around him. He has been awoken after however long by someone trying to steal from him. Smaug is extremely proud and vain, so I can totally accept that he wants to devastate Lake Town in spectacular fashion just to prove how powerful he is. He does what he wants for no reason other than that no one can stop him. Smaug is absolutely chaotic evil. And given that I think it is reasonable for him to assume, rightly or wrongly, that the dwarves are working with the men of Lake Town to bring him down, I think it's totally reasonable for Smaug to want to burninate the living shit out of them. Bilbo yells for Smaug to stop, and Smaug pauses, realizing that Bilbo cares about the men of Lake Town.
You care about them. Good. Then you can watch them die.
At this point, Bilbo and Smaug are literally face to face. If Smaug's objective was simply to eat Bilbo, as it was earlier, then there would be nothing Bilbo could do to stop him. He has nowhere to hide. I'm going to look at this from the perspective of both characters. So from Bilbo's perspective, he is running towards certain death, imploring Smaug not to go to Lake Town. Maybe it's a really dumb move for Bilbo to reveal himself and try to convince the extremely angry and unhinged Smaug not to go on a rampage. But given that in his eyes he has to try something, I think I can accept Bilbo setting aside his own self-preservation to at least attempt to stop Smaug. Smaug can, seemingly, be reasoned with to some degree, whereas Azog cannot, which is why I do not consider Bilbo's actions here to be as egregious as his actions in the finale of the first film. From Smaug's perspective, he decides not to kill Bilbo when he could do it incredibly easily, and Bilbo has already contributed to Smaug's own humiliation. Smaug, as already established, is sadistic. He wants the people Bilbo cares about to suffer. This is a greater punishment than simply killing Bilbo. And it also feeds into Smaug's pridefulness and ego, as he does not even consider that attacking Lake Town may lead to his own demise. So, Smaug moves to exit Erebor, at which point we will see if the front door was indeed an option for the dwarves, but he is stopped.
Here! You witless worm!
Smaug, thinking himself to be the best thing since sliced bread, cannot handle being taunted by Thorin, who is essentially calling him a chicken, and Smaug's ego will not allow for this slight to go unanswered. Smaug approaches Thorin, who taunts him further, and then... Smaug, seemingly overwhelmed by its beauty, as he of course is driven by a desire for gold, stands right in front of it until it melts. So this seems exceedingly unlikely and just plain old dumb. Also, I hope Bilbo made it out safe. Anyway, I have no idea how molten gold works when it's in liquid form, but I'm going to hazard a guess that you can't, with the technology available and the very limited time constraints, pump it into a giant mold of a statue, have it appear to be solid for a minute or two, and then dissolve. Additionally, the liquid gold is of a high enough quantity to completely engulf Smaug, despite him appearing to be of a similar size to the statue. If they were in a tight, confined space, then sure. Maybe the room literally fills up with liquid gold and Smaug is drowned. But as depicted, he is covered in the stuff when it seemingly should have flowed throughout the hall, creating a large, shallow puddle, not nearly enough to cover the 60-foot-tall dragon. Regardless, Smaug is not killed, and he flies towards Lake Town to show Thorin the true meaning of revenge. As he leaves, we see, rather hilariously, that the front door of Erebor was indeed wide open, and so the whole secret passage thing appears to have been entirely pointless. Meanwhile, the Lake Townians see that something is wrong, as they can see fire on the horizon. And then we get a pretty cool cliffhanger.
I am death.
What have we done?
And we cut to the credits. Alright, so that was the Desolation of Smaug. As with the first video, most of my thoughts on how this functions, or perhaps doesn't, as a movie trilogy will be saved for a final autopsy video. For now though, how does it stand on its own? So this movie is incredibly silly. I think the first film is superior, however I think that Desolation of Smaug is probably more entertaining. There is a huge amount of downtime in the first one, whereas this one doesn't really have much, if any, time to breathe. Visually, Smaug himself is fantastic, as is Erebor and Lake Town. However, most of the orcs look like trash, with a couple of exceptions, as does most of the Mirkwood areas. There isn't as much character development in this movie, and what little there is oftentimes extremely simplistic or occasionally nonsensical. Gandalf has unfortunately been reduced to a moron with no concern for his own life, when the safety of Middle-earth kind of requires that he be alive, which is something I will elaborate on in my final autopsy video when we have the added context of the third movie. We continue to have a tremendous amount of bloat and wasted time, although the wasted time in this movie was at least superficially entertaining, whereas in the first film this was rarely the case. The worst part of this movie is the characterization of the Master and Greasebag, followed closely by the Kili, Ladylas, Morgul shaft bullshittery. The Thorin might be crazy thread is painfully forced and ill-explained, and I can only assume it will get worse in the third film. Anyway, this video has turned out to be way longer than I had anticipated, which seems to happen now with every video I make, so maybe I should adjust my expectations, so I will leave it here for now. Please, if you have made it this far, consider liking, sharing, or subscribing, as it will help the channel. If you are interested in supporting my work directly, please check out my Patreon, the link is in the video description. I also live stream on YouTube every other Friday typically, so if you want to jump in chat and call me names while I fail horribly at video games, then I invite you to do so with open arms. That's all for now, thank you so much for watching, and we will continue this with the Battle of the Five Armies.